Hey guys. Here is what if Naruto was the Grand Emperor of Hueco Mundo. Once the 9 of them were considered gods, 9 great lords of Hueco Mundo. Then they vanished without a trace. Reality became legend, legend became myth, and even their names were lost to history. Then Aizen had to go and awaken the strongest of them. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 1 Prologue. Who am I? Where do I come from? What am I? Where do I belong? These are questions which I asked myself at first, when I awoke in this accursed land. I don't know who I am, or where I originally come from. I don't know what I am, and as far as I know I belong nowhere. I have no name, none that I remember. As to how old I am, well, when the years turn to decades, centuries, even millennia, one eventually stops counting. All I know is at first I had the visage of an animal, a long sinewy creature with skin of hardened white carapace, and 9 flowing tails followed me wherever I went like a shroud. I was smaller than most creatures, and at first I thought of it as a weakness. It was not until I made my first kill that I realized that size mattered very little in this world, and I have killed many more since then. Over time my body began to change, and over a course of hundreds of years I slowly changed from a 4-legged creature to a 2-legged bipedal form. By my 1500th year I had become what my subconscious saw me as, what I most likely looked like when I was human. Over these long years I slowly realized that not only was my body evolving but my intelligence as well. I began to remember things and commit them to memory. I quickly realized that I was not like the others around me. For one, I didn't seem to follow their evolutionary cycle. I didn't need to merge with hundreds of hollows to become what was known as a Jillian. Even the higher levels didn't look anything like me, for although they took on more human appearances it couldn't hold a candle to me. It was not until many years later that I realized that I had become the first true Vasta Lord level Minos Grande. Over time I found others just like me, stronger than the rest, who had gained almost completely human visages. We traveled together for a time before separating, carving out 9 vast territories in this world to call our own. We would go down in legend and lore as the 9 lords of Hueco Mundo. The first 9 hollow to be truly called Vasto Lord. There had been none before and none nearly as powerful since. We were the mothers and fathers of the final evolutionary hurdle, brothers and sisters who transcended life and death. We became monsters with a conscience, monsters that reclaimed their souls as well as our bodies and intelligence. I even remembered my own name. It was Naruto Uzumaki. I was the first to remember my name, but I would not be the last. The others slowly began to remember their identities, and over time we became something more than those around us. We became Vasto Lord. We became the 9 lords of Hueco Mundo. Gaara, the Ichibi no Shikaku. Yujuto, the Nibi no Nikomata. Yugura, the Sanbai no Kaide game. Yoshi, the Yambi no Saru. Rin, the Gobi no Ukami. Yudkate, the Rokubi no Namakuji. Fu, the Nanabai no Kabatumishi. Kirabi, the Hachibi no Kyogyo. And me, Naruto, the Kyubi no Yoko. Our reign lasted for millennia, and then something happened. It began as a rumor that one of our siblings, the 5th Lord, Rin, had vanished from her territory. Then news slowly reached my wizened ears that the others had suffered a similar fate. One by one I lost contact with my siblings until I knew I was all that remained, and that I was next. I still remember that day. The day I met the ones who had driven a wedge into our combined domains. He called himself the King of the Soul Society, Spirit King, and his 13 warriors, the first captains of the Shinigami court. They introduced themselves as such. I had heard of the term Shinigami before, but I had never met ones of such raw spiritual pressure. I learned that they were the ones who hunted down my comrades, to eliminate us as a threat to both them and the worlds they watched over. With that they struck, but I was not defenseless. The battle lasted for days, destroyed my fortress and massacred the majority of my subordinates. In return I had personally killed 6 of his captains and engaged him. Our battle had been a battle of gods, one that scarred the very earth and turned the surrounding landscape into wastelands. The eternal desert of Hueco Mundo came into existence through this conflict. He won by doing what he had done to my comrades, by whittling down my strength and sealing me away, under the ruins of my fortress for all eternity. Centuries passed, and while my body had been sealed my soul was still able to see the goings-on of Hueco Mundo. The 9 lords became stories of legend, then myth, and it was many centuries before something interesting happened again. Shinigami had entered my fortress, now a ruin, and defeated the one who had called it home, some young pup named Barragan, supposed God King of Hueco Mundo. God of Hollows preserve me. How far our race has fallen if that skeletal fool is one of the strongest. The Shinigami returned my fortress to its former glory and gathered an army with his goal being all-out war with the Soul Society, and to take the Spirit King's place. If only he knew I was down here I might have helped him, but he seemed a little off for my tastes. He gathered 10 of the strongest Minos he could find and through some unnatural alchemy turned them into something not hollow nor Shinigami, Arankar, yes that was what he called them. Arankar. Espada. I didn't know how it happened. Maybe it was just the age of time whittling away the effectiveness of the seal I was trapped in, or perhaps it was the presences of so many powerful beings that weakened my prison. All I know is that over time I felt my coffin getting weaker and weaker, until it was weak enough for me to tweak it, push the barrier back and forth until hairline cracks began to form. It would only take a single burst of my spiritual pressure to blow the top off, and I would be free. I waited until I felt the presences above me begin to disappear. I may have been considered the more powerful of the first Vasto Lord, but so many years of captivity had weakened me to the point where I would not have been able to defeat everyone skulking about my fortress. So I slept. I had waited for a couple of 1,000 years, what was another 100? I wasn't sure how long I slept for, maybe a few hours or a few years. I didn't really keep count. But I was jarred awake by a great explosion of spiritual pressure, then another and another. It must have been impressive if it awoke someone like me. There was a battle taking place above, and it looked like it was winding down. I reached out with a withered hand, pressing it against the cool surface of my coffin. The seal had corroded to the point where the slightest blast of energy would have shattered it. I spoke, voice croaking and raspy after so many years of disuse. Well, might as well say hi. I released a small amount of several thousand years of pent-up spiritual pressure. Maybe a little too much. But it did the trick. Byakuya Kuchiki had felt many powerful spiritual pressures in his lifetime. As a captain of the Gotaija Zantai, he had been called upon to deal with many a powerful hollow, and just recently he had been selected as part of an infiltration group to find and aid the substitute Shinigami and his allies when they haphazardly entered Hueco Mundo against their advice. He was the head of the prestigious Kuchiki family, captain of the 6th Shinigami Court Guard Division, and considered one of the strongest and most experienced captains of the next generation. Yet in all of his years as a Shinigami captain he had never felt a spiritual pressure this huge, not even the Zero Espada who stood before him in his release form. Not the battle-loving captain of the 11th Division nor the clearly mad scientist captain of the 12th, were nearly as powerful. The ground several dozen meters behind them bulged and exploded, throwing sand and rock high into the air, allowing a powerful blade of crimson spiritual pressure to break through and pierce the air with an almost suffocating aura. It reached so high that it pierced through the ceiling of the Fortress of Las Noches, an impressive feat considering the incredible size of this place and the height of its roof. The battle between Shinigami and Arankar came to a sudden halt as the three combatants turned to watch the spectacle in both wonder and terror. Byakuya Kuchiki wasn't familiar with this powerful Ryetsu, but knew at an almost instinctive level that it spelt more bad news for the infiltration team of Shinigami captains. A figure stepped through the crimson energy as simply as a man would step through mist or fog, hand making a simple horizontal cutting gesture that dispelled the spiritual pressure surrounding him. He was clothed in rags which might have once been considered clothing, but he could not discern their original color as they were covered in dirt and filth. He took the guise of an old man, face wrinkled and tanned from extreme age. Hair, turned white from age, stringy and unkempt as it fell all the way down to the small of his back. Exposed skin marred with liver spots, and form as thin as a rake, ribs pulling his skin taut and wiry arms and legs. He was literally nothing more than skin and bones. The eyes were the only thing that did not look decrepit, a brilliant blue which showed an abundance of life and intelligence behind them. He looked around and took a deep breath, before breaking into a mass of sputtering, hacking and coughing. He spoke after he regained control, voice raspy and croaking from what seemed like lack of use. I suppose I have to fix this, shouldn't I? He didn't wait for anyone to answer as a dense spiritual pressure surrounded him, crimson and bubbling, so strong that anyone not captain level on the Richter scale would have fallen to their knees or collapsed into unconsciousness, even death. Byakuya looked on with a wide-eyed fascination as this being transformed before them. His wrinkled and liver-spotted skin became smoother and took on a more healthy tan. As he de-aged right in front of them, Byakuya noticed whisker marks on the man's face, 3 on each cheek. He watched as muscles started to bulge across his body before it was overtaken by cloth as the rags seemed to recover into actual clothing. A white shirt and pants, black knee-high boots and a white overcoat lined with black. His white hair bleached from white to a vibrant gold, before being cut from the flick of his right wrist. A mass of blonde locks fell to the desert sands as that which remained seemed to spike naturally. What stood before them as the spiritual pressure receded was not an old man of skin and bones, but a young man in his early to mid-20s, handsome and powerful with a broad grin of white teeth. When he spoke his voice was not croaking and raspy, but gravelly and cheerful. "Ah, that's better!" The 3 Shinigami captains and 1 Espada blinked as they looked at this creature as he himself began to look around, a look of awe on his features as he checked out the huge fissure running along the ceiling of the grand fortress. A reminder of the colossal battle which took place between Ichigo Kurosaki and the 4th Espada, and then he looked around at the ruins of the once grand Las Noches. Wow, someone's really been redecorating this place. Must have gone insane from all these neutral colors. I mean really, why, did the decorator have an off day or something? He looked down at his clothes before making a distasteful face. Where is the life in these things? Where is the color and vibrancy? Byakuya blinked at the new arrival's rant before looking at the expressions of his fellow captains. It was what he had expected. The captain of the 12th Division looked at this man with a mixture of awe and clinical fascination, not surprising considering Mayuri Kuratsuchi was a scientist right down to his rotten core. The captain of the 11th Division looked at the new arrival with a manic grin. Obviously Zaraki Kenpachi wished more than anything else to fight this mysterious newcomer. Surprisingly, it wasn't him who spoke first. It was the Zero Espada, Yami Largo. The giant monstrosity roared angrily at this 4th opponent, making the blonde turn around and look at the Arankar with narrowed eyes, almost giving the impression his eyes were slanted. He didn't look very intimidated, Kichiki realized, more like questioning. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The giant roared as he neared closer to the blonde stranger, 3 original opponents forgotten. "Waltzing in here like you own the place. You must have a death wish." "Who the hell do I think I am?" the newcomer asked with a broad grin, even as the most powerful of the Espada reared back his huge fist for a blow which would have probably leveled an entire building, or a block of buildings. "Why, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I waltzed in here like I owned the place because dash." The fist came down with a thunderous crash, throwing up tons of sand and debris as it made contact with its target. It took some time for the dust to finally settle, but when it did the blonde stood, unmoving and unhurt, hand raised in a palm which seemed to stop the multiple times larger fist of the released Espada like it was child's play. "Because," he continued, smile still in place but without even a trace of mirth, "I waltzed into this place because I own this place." He vanished in a blur of motion, completely disappearing from Byakuya's senses. Then he reappeared right in front of the Zero Espada, hand reached out as if to flick the story-tall giant's forehead. Which he did, sending Yami skidding back by several dozen meters before falling on his spiked back, flattening the remains of what must have once been a cylindrical pylon. The blonde landed in a crouch, azure eyes glaring at the fallen giant with an intensity Byakuya could feel from his place. Then they settled on him and he froze, feeling a mass of killing intent which would have killed most humans. "Now then, not to sound cliché but..." He stood, spread his hands and looked to the broken roof of Hueco Mundo. "After 3,000 years I live again." Chapter 2, Think of Me as the Talking Heir. Mayuri Kuratsuchi, Captain of the 12th Division. Kenpachi Zaraki, Captain of 11th Division. Byakuya Kichiki, Captain of 6th Division. All 3 men were some of the most powerful Shinigami the Gotaija Zantai had seen in several generations. Captain Kuratsuchi was one of the most intelligent Shinigami to hold the position, barring his predecessor, and creator of the infamous Shinigami Research and Development Institute, Kisuke Urahara. Kenpachi Zaraki was one of the deadliest Shinigami the Soul Society had ever seen, killing his predecessor even without achieving Shurikai or Bankai. He wasn't even able to speak with his Zanpakuto, and yet he was one of the most feared men in history. Byakuya Kichiki was one of the finest swordsmen to come from the 4 noble houses, who were already well known for their capacity to produce excellent Shinigami, handed down the position of captain when his grandfather, Jinrei Kichiki, knew he was ready and retired. All 3 men were some of best and most deadly of their generation. They had seen much in their century as captains of the 13 Shinigami Court Guard divisions and were not easily intimidated or surprised. But it appeared these last few years had been nothing but one surprise after another. First, a human who gained Shinigami powers was able to not only break into the Soul Society but defeat Captain-class Shinigami and rescue his target. Then Sosuke Aizen, a respected fellow captain of the Shinigami Court Guard, not only betrayed the Shinigami but fell in league with their deadliest foes, the Hollows, to gain his objectives. He took 2 other captains with him when he defected, which was another surprise. Now these 3 captains had just gained their 4th great surprise. A single man appeared before them and not only stood up to the most powerful of Aizen's creations, but sent him flying with a simple poke of his finger. They didn't recognize either him or his spiritual pressure, but it was powerful, terrifyingly powerful. Now the three captains simply looked on with a mixture of bafflement and fascination as this strange man hopped up and down, rolling his shoulders and cranking his neck, almost as if he was exercising before a major workout. His expressive azure eyes were glinting with anticipation, and the toothy grin he wore didn't waver as the Zero Espada groggily rose, shaking his head as blood trickled down his face. Another surprise, that poke had enough power behind it to puncture the hierro, the armored skin of a released Aaronkar, an Espada at that. "Hey, buddy boy." Yami froze and glanced back to see the blonde-haired stranger sitting idly on his shoulder. His head quickly looked back and forth from the place where his opponent once stood to the place where he now sat. The image standing on the sands just seemed to dissolve into the very air. He moved so fast that he left an afterimage behind. "What were you looking at?" Only the Septima Espada, Samari Ruros, was able to move at such advanced speeds. Yami turned to glare at the idle blonde, but instead blinked when he saw the man pointing at his nose, that same toothy grin still in place. Bang! A Ciro exploded from his fingertip, a simple ball of crimson energy which exploded into a concentrated beam of deadly spiritual pressure. The blast slammed into the Zero Espada's nose and a snap of crushed bone and cartilage echoed through the broken fortress. Yami roared in anguish before falling back to the desert sands, blood splattering from his recently broken nose. The blonde form dissolved into the air as the Zero Espada hit the ground with such force that a small-scale earthquake shook the fortress. Loose Sekiseki rock fell away from half-demolished structures. There was almost a full minute of silence before those assembled knew that the Espada wasn't going to be getting back up anytime soon. The captains were immediately on alert, searching the dunes for any sign of the newest warrior. They found him standing a scant few meters behind them, bowing theatrically, head downturned and blonde bangs covering his upper face. That grin was still in place, but with what was witnessed it had a more vicious aura about it. "Who are you?" Kuchiki asked, outwardly unimpressed by the display even as his hands slowly strayed for the unsheathed hilt of his Zanpakuto. "It doesn't matter." The blonde straightened, looking at each man in turn before a smirk crossed his whiskered features. "You three can just think of me as the Talking Heir." "The Talking Heir?" Kenpachi scoffed at the notion, pointing his ragged sword at the newcomer. "What kind of name is that? If you're the Talking Heir, then do us all a favor, stop talking." "Oh, scary." The blonde's voice was full of sarcasm before gaining a trace of anger. "It seems that not much has changed after 3,000 years. You Shinigami have always had no manners. Even with the first generation it was always the superior attitude and cocky cannot be beaten belief that really pissed me off." He began slowly walking towards them, hands in his pant pockets and posture giving off an air of non-interest, but with every step he took the air got thicker and thicker. His eyes were like twin dead pits of blue as he calmly watched them, and once he was within 10 paces he spoke, voice commanding. "What are you doing in my domain?" The spiritual pressure was so dense it was almost palpable, yet the captains simply looked on. Finally one of them replied. It was Kuratsuchi, hopping down from his perch. "What do you mean, your domain?" The blonde grinned, but it was maniacal and full of malice. "Exactly what I meant. All that you see here is mine. From the eternal desert to the underground forest to the fortress itself is my domain, my territory. This is a sanctuary for the lost. Shinigami have no authority and no right to be here." Kenpachi snarled. "Who the hell are you?" "You're obviously not one of Aizen's little pets," Mayuri added, completely ignoring the 11th Division captain's murderous glare. The blonde grinned as he brought up his right hand, thumb pointing at his face. "Who am I? Let me tell you a story. 3,000 years ago the first generation of Shinigami captains came to this land. They pillaged, destroyed and purified, but of the numerous thousands of lost souls there were 9 who had the power to match them, and best them, the 9 lords of Hueco Mundo. The Shinigami knew that if these 9 Vasto Lord gathered then they had no chance of victory, so they picked them off one by one, unable to kill us but seal us." Mayuri scoffed, catching his fellow captain's attention. "Are you having a laugh? The 9 lords are a myth, a bedtime story parents tell annoying brats to make them eat their food and go to bed. 9 lords don't make me laugh, boy." "Boy?" The blonde looked up at Mayuri, and the density of the spiritual pressure became visible as a mass of bubbling crimson. "You have the audacity to call me a boy? Do not test me, you young pup. I and my siblings had achieved the ultimate evolution before your great-grandfather was a twinkle in your great-great-grandmother's eye." Byakuya felt a chill run down his spine at the words. He had also heard of the story of the 9 Hollow Lords. According to legend they were the mothers and fathers of Minos Grande, the first to reach such heights of power and savagery. Mayuri looked like he was about to gag, drawing his form back as if he had tasted something foul. "I and my siblings. Unable to kill us but seal us. Are you saying?" Byakuya began, noticing that the 12th Division captain began to take in shaky breaths. That you are one of the 9 lords of Hueco Mundo? The man grinned at him, a toothy, predatory grin. So there is a brain amongst you 3. Which one are you? Byakuya asked, hand now on his zanpakuto. You cannot be the 2nd, 5th, or 7th lord. They were all female hollows if I remember the tale. Ah yes. Naruto spun around, hands outstretched, wicked grin still in place. Yujito-chan, whose beauty was only matched by the sharpness of her claws, Rin-chan, how gorgeous she was when she howled at the moon. She was always at her best on those full moon nights. Fu-chan, whose voice was as haunting as it was stunning. Yujito the Crimson Claw, Rin of the Bloody Moon, and Fu of the Ruby Wings. Mayuri muttered, only to hear a smash of laughter from the supposed lord. I can see the Soul Society has vilified even those 3 maidens. I suppose victory really is written by the victors, eh? He stopped spinning and bowed majestically. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and I am the 9th lord. Their expressions were hilarious. Byakuya's eyes widened until they were the size of saucers. Mayuri was completely silent, though he looked like he had swallowed something sour. The most interesting was from Kenpachi, who didn't seem worried in the slightest. If anything, he looked disappointed. Oh, I suppose that means you're the weakest, huh? A smile spread across the bowing blonde's face as he raised his head and straightened his posture. You obviously don't know our story, do you? Let me educate you, son. It's not the number 1 lord who is the strongest. The number of strength goes from 1 to 9, not 9 to 1. His form once again dissolved into the air, and Kenpachi felt hot breath against the shell of his ear. So by that logic, that makes me the strongest. The combat captain spun around, lashing out with his sword in a horizontal swing only to hit nothing but air. Naruto was standing, calm and serene, watching as the tip of the jagged blade passed mere millimeters away from the bridge of his nose. In a blur, he was within Zaraki's defenses, and with a face which showed no emotion hit his opponent with a simple palm thrust to the chest. It was enough to send the 11th Division captain flying through the air, impacting against a dune with enough force to kick up a mass of sand. Naruto felt a sudden shift in the air, and bringing up his right hand caught the blade of another zanpakuto, this one belonging to Kachiki, who had decided to perform one of his signature Shunpa combinations. The blonde grinned as he looked up at the 6th Division captain. Senka, huh? Uzumaki tilted his head, grin not leaving. A special Shunpa technique where one moves to their opponent's back, aiming for the Seketsu and Hakusui points, and sealing an opponent's spiritual pressure with a single stroke. It is so fast that most victims aren't aware whether they've been stabbed in the front or the back, right? How do you know this? I fought an opponent who utilized that same technique. Naruto's grin became vicious. It cost him dearly when he tried to use it against me a second time. In the blink of an eye, Byakuya was flying, smashing into the ground hard and skidding to a halt. The supposed lord of Hueco Mundo stood impassive, right leg held up as if imitating a high kick. He took a deep breath and brought the leg down again, smirk returning. I remember captains being tougher than this. He spun as a trident-like weapon with 3 serpentine blades passed by him. In a single fluent motion he continued his spin, bringing him across and behind the 3rd and final captain as he continued to lunge on his own momentum. Mayuri's eyes kept the blonde within sight before he too was felled by an open palmed strike to his back. He was literally thrown off his feet, limbs flailing, hitting the ground several meters away and skidding several more to a stop. Humph, young pups! Naruto scowled as he looked at his hand, curling it up into a fist as he flexed his muscles. There was a satisfying creak. The Kuchiki had some finesse, but the other 2 lacked any tact. Suddenly the dune where he sent the first captain exploded in a mass of released spiritual pressure, so much that it made the 9th lord look up and take notice. The spiritual pressure, visible as a mass of yellow, suddenly made the blonde grin, and the maniacal, loud, howling laughter was like music to his ears. No tact, but a lot of energy to burn. Naruto grinned ferociously as he watched Kenpachi Zaraki. Looks like I judged a little too soon. This is more like a captain. Bankai! Naruto looked around in time to see a massive creature rise up from the desert sands. It reminded him of a caterpillar, except for the golden, bulbous head which looked an awful lot like a baby, with eyes without pupils or sclera, just dead whites, and purple marking which looked like unshed tears under its eyes. A red cape was tied around its neck. A halo hovered over its head, and he heard a ringing of bells somewhere on its huge, terrifying visage. The voice of the 12th Division captain echoed through the huge fortress. Kanjiki Ashisoji Jaizo! Yes. Naruto's already ferocious grin warped into something monstrous. Yes, this is more like a captain. For the longest time she had slept through this hell, this nothing. Her last memory of freedom was flying and fighting before she was soundly defeated. The woman scoffed at the word defeat, for her enemies had won by sheer force of numbers. One-on-one she could have taken any one of them, but three of them decided to fight her at once. The last thing she remembered of freedom was lying on the sand, beaten, bloodied, and broken. The taste of copper was overwhelming in her mouth, her long hair cut free from its bindings, covering her face and the ground around her head like a messy halo. She wasn't able to lift her hand to defend herself. She had been spent and defenseless as their leader. The strongest of them all had muttered the incantation, binding her to this confined space deep beneath the endless dunes she loved to run through. For the longest time she had tried to escape from this prison through sheer force. She would punch and kick and scream for long spans of time until her throat was raw and her muscles protested even the slightest movement. She would wait until her strength returned before beginning the whole cycle over and over again. The most heart-wrenching memory, though, was how close she had come to making it to her strongest sibling's fortress, just out of his sight. If she had made it to within his gaze, he would have come out and rescued her. The relationship between the two of them was a complicated one, as could be the same for the relationship between the group of individuals which were the Nine Lords. Together the two of them could have made a better fight of it. She knew that when he was finally defeated that he had hurt the enemy far more than she did, and even during those years where she fought her imprisonment in vain, that one fact gave her satisfaction. Eventually she just stopped trying, and decided to sleep the millennia away until either she died or the seal failed. Time slipped past. She didn't know how much. Then she felt an unbridled power, and besides her body's protests she managed a weak smile. The Ninth Lord, her eldest and most powerful brother, had finally broken free from his cage in tremendous fashion, and as usual he had overdone it. She felt his power flow across the desert sands like a tsunami, and that feeling gave her hope which she had lost many eons ago. Then a powerful wave of his power swept across her seal, and she saw hairline cracks appearing before her. She looked at them for an eternity before a smile slowly spread across wrinkled flesh. The seal had been damaged by her sibling's release, and perhaps with just the right amount of pressure she gathered her spiritual pressure, a great well of power which had not been used in millennia, but slowly built up until it was bursting at the seams. 3,000 years of power was at her fingertips, begging for a release. She took a deep breath and released. A blade of bubbling azure spiritual pressure exploded from the largest sand dune for countless kilometers around, sliding up and piercing the cloudless sky like a blade. Hollows all around felt the sudden power and fled in a panic. She stood wobbling in the center of the sand dune, which had been crushed and turned into a crater beneath her shriveled feet. The old woman, dressed in rags with long scraggly hair pooling onto the sand, looked around, took a deep breath and released her spiritual pressure to its fullest. Her appearance changed. The long scraggly white hair immediately became healthy, turning light blonde before being cut by a simple flick of her wrist. What remained was a mane of wild straw blonde hair which fell down to her lower back. Another flick of the wrist, and the delicate strands tied across each other into a braid. Her skin changed from flaccid wrinkles to pale, unblemished, and toned skin. The rags just giving her modesty changed to white and black clothes, pants, a high-collared jacket and mesh-armored shirt, which showed an impressive bust and hourglass figure. She stretched, emitting a feline purr of satisfaction as she felt every muscle protest and bones pop to the movement after several thousand years of misuse. That done, she looked in the direction of the spiritual pressure, and with a smile took off in that direction. After 3,000 years of imprisonment, Yujitoni was free. Dusting his hands off with an audible sigh, Naruto looked over the partially destroyed landscape, and at the two panting captains standing before him. Kenpachi Zaraki was taking in huge gulps of air, but he was still grinning like a man and was still holding onto his sword. Mayuri Kuratsuchi was doubling over in pain, left arm blown away up to the shoulder and blood pooling onto the pale sand. His bankai was still active, and was even now disgorging a mass of strange-colored mist from its mouth. The mad scientist grit his teeth as he fought through the pain, and with a snap of his wrist sent Kanjiki Ashisoji Jizo on a collision course, smashing through the sands with its mouth open and disgorging even more poisonous gases. Naruto tilted his head to the side, pondering, before shrugging his shoulders and straightening his right hand. He brought his hand up in a vertical slashing motion, as if the limb were a broadsword which he was wielding. A blade of condensed crimson lashed out across the landscape, cutting Kanjiki Ashisoji Jizo perfectly in half in a mass of flying blood and ripped apart cartilage. The blade didn't stop with the bank either, but continued on towards the two captains hiding behind it. Kenpachi saw it coming and dodged to the side, but Mayuri wasn't as lucky. He was barely able to move to his right before the blade sliced off another chunk of flesh from his hip all the way up to the muscles between his shoulder and neck. The mad captain screamed in agony, before leveling a hated glare at the Vasto Lord who so effortlessly ripped through his bankai. "Damn you!" he growled through gnashing teeth. Curse you, you insect! Do you really think this is the end of me? Do you truly believe you have won? If I'm an insect, a voice from behind him spoke, causing the mad captain to freeze, eyes widening as the form before them just disintegrated into dust. Then I would guess I'm a spider, and you're a delicate little fly caught in my web. He spun around just in time for a straightened hand to pierce through his chest and exit his back in a shower of blood. He was just able to see the blonde-haired Vasto Lord grin victoriously at him before he blacked out. With no effort he snapped his arm, sending the now limp body colliding hard with the ground. Come to my web, said the spider to the fly. Naruto didn't give the prone body another look. Instead he set his sights on the second captain who had challenged him. Kenpachi was grinning in an insane manner which would match his own wicked grin, and his unsheathed sword was leaning against his broad right shoulder. Aren't you going to run? Naruto asked wryly with a raised brow. Nah, the captain replied nonchalantly with a shrug of his shoulders. But you could if you want to, don't let me stop you. Naruto should have taken that as an offense, but instead his grin widened until it stretched from ear to ear. You are definitely my favorite brand of person to fight, a shitload of energy and not even remotely afraid of death. His grin was mirrored by the towering man. Death, who gives a shit about death? I'm in heaven right now, my own personal nirvana. I've finally met someone worthy of fighting. His spiritual pressure exploded then, a mass of yellow flames that seemed to sap all light from the surrounding sky. Naruto looked up with a feral grin as this man's spiritual pressure gave birth to the form of a screaming human skull. I'm honored, but why don't you release your Shurkai, or better yet your Bankai, and then we can really get this party rolling. Shurkai, Bankai? Zaraki asked before throwing his head back and laughed hard. I would love to, sadly my sword isn't very talkative, don't even know the bastard's name. Damn man, that really blows, the blonde replied. All of this power without even knowing the name of your sword. Why don't you go away, learn your sword's name and then come back and face me? I would even clear my schedule for such a confrontation. Nah, I ain't the type of guy to just back down and run away, not when there's such a strong guy to kill. As if to amplify his statement, he lashed out with his sword and a tide of spiritual pressure exploded from the blade, heading straight towards his foe. Naruto watched the blade of energy closing in without batting an eye and with a simple swipe of his hand deflected it. The yellow blade of energy hit and exploded against a large dune, sending sand flying. Naruto muttered as he shook his hand. That actually stung a little. I like you, man, I really like you, and as a gift for actually making me feel a little pain I will face you on even terms. He reached out with his right hand and a sheathed katana came into being, almost as if it was born from the air itself, and what a beautiful weapon it was. The hilt and sheath were covered in crisscross black and crimson cloth, two strands flailing in the wind. The hilt was shaped like a curved shuriken and the blade radiated power. He gripped the weapon with both hands, one on the hilt while the other was on the sheath, and slowly drew the weapon with a scrape of metal. The blade seemed to be made of liquid silver, shining magnificently in the daylight. Zaraki laughed with barely contained glee. The weapon had its own power, seemingly doubling his opponent's spiritual pressure just by being unsheathed. It was beautiful. It was magnificent. It was completely and utterly ruthless. Bubbling crimson spiritual pressure slid along the Vasto Lord's form and his sword, and when the creature opened his eyes they had gone from brilliant azure to bloody crimson, slit pupils and even the whites of his eyes bled black. He spoke, voice a guttural growl which held nothing but utter bloodthirsty joy and mirth. You ready? Kenpachi Zaraki grinned like a madman, gripping his nameless Zanpakuto in a two-handed grip, mirrored perfectly by his opponent's. Yellow and crimson spiritual pressures were already pushing against each other, draining the surrounding area of all light and life, a true battle between titans. Oh yes! They walked a few steps, and then increased their pace to a jog, then a run. In perfect synchrony the two old combatants raised their swords above their heads, ready for downward strokes. Feral grins mirrored on their faces and immortalized in their memories. Then they were upon each other, and in a flash both swords came crashing down. The release of spiritual pressure from the combined strikes was enormous, an explosion which flattened dunes and destroyed surrounding structure. The yellow and crimson spiritual pressures mixed and merged in a beautiful cacophony of unbridled destruction. When the dust cleared the land for 100 meters in every direction had turned into a colossal crater with the two combatants in the center. Their backs were to each other, easily 3 to 4 steps apart, grins still held on each of their faces, hands still gripping their katana in basic kendo stances. Seconds passed before the victor was shown. Kenpachi Zaraki, captain of the 11th Shinigami Court Guard Division, fell to his knees, a diagonal slash carved along his chest. Blood dribbled down the corners of his mouth, but his grin held. Beaten, huh? The blonde didn't answer for the longest time. Yeah. But not dead, I don't want you to die, Naruto replied as he turned around, relaxing his stance and removing the blood from his sword with a simple flick of his wrist. The crimson liquid spattered against the flattened sand. I want you to leave this place and get stronger, learn Shurkai, learn Bankai, come back here and face me again. Zaraki laughed, spitting out a large gob of blood. I look forward to it. He fell face first onto the sand. Naruto looked down at his fallen opponent and grinned. Yeah, me too. He walked, leaving his fallen foe behind, scaling the small hills of the crater in a matter of moments. Once he was on flat land again, he looked around, searching for his next target. That was 2 captains down, but where was the third? His blow couldn't have been that serious. Bankai. Ah, there he was. Darkness fell and blades slid from said darkness, as if they were piercing the surface of a still pond. He could make out the ripples as they expanded and merged. The blades which rose to the infinite black reminded him of an honor guard, or a funeral procession. He turned to lock eyes with the Kichiki, who held his now bladeless hilt in front of his chest in a military-like salute. Senbenzakura Kageyoshi. Bankai. Naruto let the word leave his tongue, savoring the power it held, before allowing a grin to once again form. Bankai, yes, definitely the Bankai of a Kichiki. This is more like it. He fell into a stance, sword held in one hand while the sheath formed on his other, held in a backwards grip. Naruto watched with rising respect as millions of cherry blossoms seemed to form from the air itself, all coming together in a single huge, writhing mass, a stunning and nostalgic sight, reminding him of images of a beautiful girl with pink hair and dazzling green eyes. Yes, such a beautiful sight. It had been a while. 3,000 years had indeed passed since he felt this presence, this aura, this power. It had been even longer since he had felt this suffocating layer of spiritual pressure descend on not just him but the whole of the domain. Heck, he would be surprised if the shockwaves of his release hadn't been felt at the other side of Hueco Mundo. Yes, it had been a while. Then he had felt another familiar presence, breaking free soon after the shockwaves of the first had died down. He felt her power next, and knew that their long imprisonment was coming to an abrupt end. Like a row of dominoes falling one after the other, a true chain reaction on a large scale. He knew his time had come the moment he saw a crack appear on his seal, right before his eyes, as if he was watching a pane of glass slowly cave in under the pressure. With a single aged hand he pressed against it and released. A golden pillar of spiritual pressure shattered the shell-shocked seal and he rose from his sarcophagus. The sand answered his subconscious command, immediately swirling around him like a tornado of minuscule particles. His long white hair became dark red, skin tightened and firmed, limbs regained old muscles long lost to misuse and decay. Basic clothes covered his once rag-covered form, a simple white shirt, scarf and pants all flowing with the gale force winds. He reached out with his spiritual pressure, feeling a total of 6 additional presences. One was unmistakably his sister, racing towards the epicenter. The other 5 were all clumped together in the direction of the old fortress. 3 were Shinigami, low to mid-captain level, another felt strange, like a mixture of Shinigami and Hollow, and the final one felt like a Hollow, definitely his brother by the way he kept his spiritual pressure contained. He always held back against the enemy. The Lord took a deep breath and allowed the tornado to subside. Gaara opened his eyes and looked over the desert sands of Hueco Mundo before taking off in a blur of motion so fast dust rose from where he treaded. He felt his sister already on the move, well ahead of him and her traveling to the source of the disturbance which had freed them. Only one person was so powerful that he could accidentally undo ancient seals. Naruto was up and about and was in the middle of a brawl. The strange Bastardi's presence was already dormant, meaning he had been beaten into unconsciousness, and while he was running he felt one of the Shinigami fall dormant as well. The 9th Lord had already incapacitated 2 of his 4 opponents. There was defeating an enemy, and then there was just showing off. Maybe if he increased his speed he could make it before his brother destroyed everything. That was doubtful though. His sister had a good head start, too good for him to beat. Once she got there the 2 of them would completely annihilate whoever the enemy was. His memories of the time when he was sealed were sketchy. All he recalled was facing a small group of men wearing black Shihakusho uniforms with katana strapped to their sides. He had attempted to fight but was surprised and quickly surrounded. All he remembered was pain and agony as his strength was sealed, then he was left there, seeing all around him fall into anarchy while he was unable to stop it. Hueco Mundo went to the dogs the moment their guiding hands were removed. Their last few children had slowly died off one after the other, leaving behind mindless hollows who went as they pleased. In time it seemed that the evolutionary chain would slowly create replacements, but that never happened. That would soon change. But first he needed to expel the Shinigami from this place, and as he felt the second Shinigami presence go dark, he knew the action would be over before he arrived. By how quickly his brother was knocking around his opponents, he considered it might be over even before his sister arrived. Or maybe not, the last one felt strong. Gaara smiled. It was a good day to be free, a very good day. Chapter 3: Flaming Cherry Blossoms. His speed was phenomenal. The mass of pink blossoms would rise up like a great maw, ready to devour this human form hollow within its bladed depths. Byakuya Kachiki, captain of the 6th Company, stood in the center of a tattered hurricane of cherry blossoms, feet spread, body coiled, white scarf billowing in the wind, and hands outstretched as if he were signaling his Bankai where to go, where to strike, and Senbonzakura Kagyoshi followed his commands without hesitancy, flowing like a beautiful writhing cloud of death. The 9th Lord watched this display as he moved faster than the eye could detect, faster than anything Hueco Mundo had ever seen in millennia. Every time it looked like the swarm of pink petals were about to envelope him, he would vanish from their grasp and reappear a safe distance away, feet not once touching the ground since the battle began. He was a wraith, a phantom, a ghost in the eternally dark skies. He was too fast for this Bankai to catch, even with every elaborate trap the Kachiki pulled from his impressive arsenal. Every trap was quickly and efficiently evaded. Yet every time the Lord attempted to strike, the cherry blossoms would retreat and rise in defense of their wielder, creating an impenetrable wall which cut any who attempted to break through. It reminded Naruto of his fellow sibling Gaara's ultimate defense of sand, except instead of this defense piercing or crushing the attacker, it sliced almost microscopic cuts into the skin, and if one was caught and swallowed by this Bankai, then there was no chance of coming out of it unscathed. He reappeared 20 meters above the ground, ducking a scythe-shaped mass of petals, sidestepping another, and then disappearing in another sonito when the real cloud of danger presented itself. He blurred above it, outstretched hand already firing a mid-level Zero into the crimson swarm. They scattered like a shoal of fish would a predator, reforming and coming at him again. Naruto blurred, climbing another 20 feet in less than a millisecond before firing a stronger Zero, watching as the outcome remained the same. This stalemate between them was becoming troublesome. He spun around, stretching his hand out to fire yet another Zero at the wielder, watching as the mass of cherry blossoms representing Senbonzakura Kagyoshi rose up in defense of their master. Naruto tilted his head, grinning slightly as he held out his hand and allowed his sword, this time completely unsheathed, to appear on his palm. He coiled his body slightly before swinging the weapon in a wide arc, the movement creating a blade of bubbling crimson spiritual pressure to lance forth. The blade slammed into the defense, and for a moment the amassed petals seemed to almost buckle before the energy behind the attack gave out. A little more power, and he should be able to pierce it. The sakura petals surrounded and encompassed him then, using his distraction to take full advantage. They sliced through his skin and clothing like thousands of razor-sharp blades, cutting and hacking and slicing. There was an explosion of blood and gore which covered the white sands, and through it all he heard the Kachiki's voice. "You underestimated me, Uzumaki Naruto." "Oh," he replied, now 30 meters above the now startled Kachiki, hands together to keep hold of the monumental power of a grand raised Zero. The ultimate Zero sparked and writhed in his hands, its electric blue light so different from the usual dark crimson. Within moments he had compressed this ultimate strike into a small ball no larger than his hand before throwing it the same way one would throw a baseball. "I don't know about that." Byakuya Kachiki raised his hand and Senbonzakura Kagyoshi answered his call with impressive speed, amassing into a thick wall of 1,000 cherry-colored petals just as the fist-sized ball impacted. In that moment the energy released, but there was no sound of an explosion, just a piercing white light that sapped the darkness away. When the light finally faded, Byakuya Kachiki stood, arms held in front of him, palms of his hands charred and smoking. The writhing mass of his Bankai in front of him were nothing more than a burning mass of dead black petals falling to the sands. His stony expression remained in place though, and the 9th Lord had to give him respect for not letting his pain show. Maybe next time I should add a little more power to it," Naruto mused as the Shinigami captain made a chopping motion with his hand and the swarm of petals began their attack anew, only faster. Their sudden burst of speed surprised the hollow before he used his own blurring speed to get out of the way. "So if he uses his hands his attacks are twice as fast," Naruto muttered, reappearing 30 meters away and seeing that the blades were still coming, getting faster with each moment. If this kept up the petals would eventually get him, and he couldn't have that. He performed yet another sonito, this time using all of his speed and agility. Byakuya's eyes shifted to look behind him when he felt the hollow's spiritual pressure reappear, no warning and no trail. He simply vanished from sight and reappeared, so fast that he might as well have teleported. His sword was in his hand again, which was held in preparation for a horizontal arc. "Sorry boy, but this is the end game." The Kachiki spun around just as Naruto swung his sword, reaching out with his hand to catch the blade, which left a light gash along his palm. Blood flowed from the wound, coating the blade and dripping from his hand. Naruto frowned as he looked on, confused, before he felt the spiritual pressure of his opponent double, and then triple. Quickly he jumped back, landing in a crouch, sword still in hand. Uzumaki Naruto, known as the Ninth Lord, but also the Firstborn, King of Foxes, Grand Emperor of Hollows and Keeper of Hueco Mundo. It is said that your power is capable of leveling mountains and creating devastating tsunamis, an unstoppable force and an unmovable object all in one. Azure Blue met dark brown and held. I can see that the stories are true if you are capable of fighting me even when my Bankai is released, but that ends here. Once again the thousands upon thousands of pink petals rose up, but this time not in defense of their master and not to attack him. Instead they collided together, forming a huge dome around the two combatants before disintegrating and reforming all around them into a truly awe-inspiring sight, one that Naruto knew he would never forget until his dying breath. Swords. Hundreds of swords. Line after line of swords, creating from the innumerable mass of sakura petals, came into existence, forming together to form the very dome-like object he saw at the beginning. Each sword had the basic design of a well-crafted katana, and the power emanating from each of them was truly impressive, not something to be struck with. These swords surrounded the two combatants in 4 rows, one on top of the other. For the first time in this fight the Ninth Lord wondered if he was capable of dodging them all. Sakei Senbenzakura Kageyoshi, the Kuchiki declared, reaching out with his bloodied hand in time to catch the handle of one of these blades. The pink spiritual pressure condensed before becoming an exact replica of the same sword the Shinigami used before he released his Bankai, a beautifully crafted blade, simple in its craftsmanship. This is what happens to Senbenzakura when I completely change my strategy from defense to completely killing my enemy. You are the third person to ever see this stage. Naruto was now completely serious, all traces of mirth gone as he continued to stare into the Kuchiki's unyielding gaze. I am honored, truly. I might really have to work to be able to dodge all of these blades. Don't worry, the Shinigami replied with a simple shake of his head. These 1,000 blades are simply your funeral procession. They will not attack you all at once. Good to hear. Naruto grinned, pointing his sword right at the waiting form of Kuchiki Byakuya. Let's get started then. Both vanished in a duo of blurs, coming together in a speed too quick for the eye to make out. Sparks flew as the two blades met with a fierce velocity, bubbling crimson and calm blue battling each other for control of this space just as their two masters continued the battle. It wasn't hard to follow his spiritual pressure. Even someone completely unable to sense such things would be aware of the ominous aura which filled the air. Lost no chase had changed, was the first thing Yujito realized as she raced across the sands at almost 10 times the speed of sound. The once modest yet aesthetically pleasing fort had been replaced by a huge and gaudy dome, tall spires stabbing out as if trying to pierce the sky. She smiled thinly, knowing full well that her eldest and strongest sibling would not be pleased with such a drastic change from his ancient castle. He was never one to live in such massive creations. Naruto had always considered his fortress to be the home of himself and his chosen. At its height his home had been as large as a small settlement, but this thing was large enough to be considered a city. Then again the differences in their opinions was radical. While Naruto enjoyed a grounded place for him to live, it was a different story for Yujito. The Second Lord had always been a wanderer from the day she regained her mind until the day she was imprisoned in that coffin of Sekiseki rock, traveling the endless deserts of Hueco Mundo with her chosen. She hopped, skipped, and then jumped, soaring through the Rietsu thick air over the large fortress, and looking down at what she saw from her bird's-eye view. There had been quite the battle inside this fortress, such a battle that it had spilled into the outside world. The huge crevice-shaped scar running along the top of the dome was proof of this, as was the black scorch marks and wreckage. The scent of discharged spiritual pressure, both Shinigami and Hollow alike, was thick in the air, almost palpable to her still recovering senses. Yujito's feline eyes looked down through the broken ceiling to see nothing but white desert sand, a few structures of Sekiseki rock scattered about, but other than that it was sand. What was the point in building such a huge structure when most of its interior was left barren? Shrugging her shoulders, the blonde was about to dive through the hole. Naruto seemed to be having a little trouble with the last Shinigami, not surprising considering the buffoon went to battle the moment he broke from his seal. Yujito had broken out of hers a few moments after him, and she guessed her power was only at around 50% of what it had been. The same could be said for her eldest brother, because she had felt him destroy opponents with twice the spiritual pressure of the one he was currently fighting. Drastically she changed her course, bringing her in a steep dive towards the opening between outside world and interior of fortress. She shot through the hole without a second thought, and came to an abrupt stop 20 meters down, surveying the area before looking up at the ceiling, frowning as she did. The landscape was a mess of cratered ground and half-destroyed structure, dispensed spiritual pressure hung in the air like a repressive cloud, barely contained by the now breached shell of sekiseki rock surrounding the fortress. She looked up and frowned, noticing that the interior surface of the barrier was made to look like a daytime sky in either the human world or the Soul Society, complete with the white wisps of clouds. Forgetting about the surrounding scenery, she submerged herself in the spiritual pressure, searching through the masses of alien presences until she found the one she was looking for, the only familiar spiritual pressure in this fortress. She was away like a shot, moving beyond the speed of sound to become nothing more than a shapeless blur as she tore through the landscape until she found her destination. What she saw was a domed object, quite large and as dark as the darkest abyss, yet she felt the clashing spiritual pressures of the Ninth Lord and the Shinigami captain battling within. With a gliding finesse, she stepped on a large flat piece of debris several dozen meters away, testing its weight to make sure it was well grounded into the sand before sitting down to wait. Knowing her elder like she did, Yujito was sure he would not appreciate her intervention. He was just the kind of person who wished to fight his own battles himself and not get others involved unless it was a moment of absolute necessity. So she sat down and waited, leaning back to lie on the flat slab and enjoyed the small things about being free. The cool, crisp wind was a welcome comfort to the many millennia of stale air, softly caressing her face and blowing through her long straw-blonde hair. She missed this feeling, the touch of the wind. Naruto brought his blade down with such force that it sliced straight through the Ryutsu-made blade of the Shinigami captain, the weapon disintegrating in shards of pink light. Byakuya was forced to flash away from his opponent, raising his hand to allow yet another sword to soar into his waiting fist. A flick of his wrist and 4 more fell with blurring speed. 3 missed the blonde-haired Vasto Lord, but the 4th hit its mark, missing his leg but impaling into his right foot. The hollow ground his teeth, yet pulled the blade out and threw it away with swiftness. Byakuya had to admit he was impressed by the hollow's pain threshold, especially with his Bankai in this advanced stage. Senbonzakura Kageyoshi not only turned his spiritual pressure into blades but also increased their potential power significantly. Anyone less would have lost a foot. But he was wearing the Lord down, managing to hit him with blade after blade of spiritual pressure. Most of the wounds were superficial, deep cuts and stabs to non-vital areas, but he was definitely wearing the hollow down. Another Shunpa brought him face to face with the hollow Lord, and just as the 2 blades met, Byakuya brought his free hand up, catching the falling blade with ease and plunging it into the hollow's leg. Naruto hissed in pain, finally falling to a knee, but was still fast enough to bring his sword up to block Kichiki's swing. He saw his chance and, forming a Siro with his free hand, slammed it into the Shinigami's torso, watching with a grim look as it shredded through clothing, skin, bone, cartilage, and organs with frightening ease. A beam of dark crimson exploded from the Shinigami's back, blasting through the dark shell and into the upper atmosphere of Las Noches. The only problem was that there was no body anymore. The Shinigami just seemed to be there one moment and gone the next. Naruto saw this coming, knowing that there was no way a Shinigami of this man's caliber would fall so easily. He knew the man was behind him, unharmed from that deadly point-blank strike, ready to pierce him. Naruto vanished from sight courtesy of a Sonido, reappearing behind the stoic captain, yet he found himself once again face to face with him. A finger was pressing against the nape of his neck, and the Ninth Lord was aware of him uttering a few words. Hado 4 Byakurai. A bolt of condensed lightning pierced straight through Naruto's collarbone, exploding forth much the same way as his Siro did before. The blast pierced the eternal black walls before dissipating in Las Noches' upper atmosphere. Naruto staggered back, hacking and gasping before vanishing from sight. Byakuya's eyes widened at the empty space before falling back to their bored norm. He knew exactly where the hollow would attack from, and with the briefest of glances 5 blades came rushing down from the funeral columns surrounding them. He heard the sounds of metal piercing flesh and several grunts of pain. He turned to see the Ninth Lord bent over, gasping for air as blood ran unimpeded down his frame, dousing his clothing in the crimson liquid. Each of the 5 blades had hit their mark with armor-piercing force. The first went right into his shoulder blade, biting deeply enough to break through the bone and into his body, another in his back, another piercing straight through his left leg, another into his right foot down to the hilt, and finally the 5th blade through his abdomen, at an angle, exiting above his tailbone. I am amazed that you can still stand. Most would be dead from those wounds, Byakuya stated in his same stoic tone, raising his hand to allow a 6th blade to soar into it. He leveled the weapon, bladed tip against Naruto's throat. This is the end. You have indeed proved yourself as a lord of Hueco Mundo. Go to your grave knowing that. He stopped short when he heard it, beginning as a croak from the hollow's throat. It slowly morphed into a chuckle, then a laugh, then a howl of laughter. Blood spattered from his mouth, yet he did not seem to care. He rose up, his crimson life fluid dyeing the sand at his feet red with blood. I'm disappointed in myself, Naruto stated as he finally calmed down. I honestly thought I could go longer than this, but I suppose I don't have a choice. I'll give you a parting gift, Shinigami, but be mindful of my warning. The whisker-like scars on his cheeks became dark and ominous, looking more like crevices. His canines elongated into full fangs, glistening and sharper than a razor. His fingernails snapped and elongated into wickedly sharp claws. It was his eyes that caught Byakuya's attention. When he opened his eyes, they weren't the azure blue he had become accustomed to. They became vulpine, scarum morphing to the color of blood. Pupils becoming sharp sickles and black seemingly bleeding into the whites of his eyes. Only the Spirit King has seen this form and lived. His voice was a guttural snarl, beyond human or hollow, and the spiritual pressure became visible as a cloak of bubbling crimson. Rip the world asunder dash. First there was the power, permeating the very air. Doubling. Tripling. Quadrupling. Yujito smiled as nostalgia hit her, and breathed it in as if it were much-needed oxygen. How long had it been since she felt this? How long since she felt this unbridled strength? This hidden power whose reserves were deeper than the deepest oceans? This hidden power whose reserves were higher than the highest mountains? This hidden power which would make even a god stand up and take notice. How long has it been since you last released your true form? She asked, knowing no one would be there to hear her but saying it just the same. She took another deep breath and released a sigh of contentment, leaning back and allowing her hands to take her weight. How long since you looked up to the heavens themselves and roared your defiance? The dome of blackness, which held her eldest brother and his Shinigami adversary, rippled as if it were the surface of a still lake, then cracks began to form along its frame, small at first but quickly growing longer and thicker like a pane of glass whose stress level was surpassed. The explosion which followed was magnificent. The dome of spiritual pressure blew apart, sending rapidly dissipating shards and debris of spiritual pressure in every direction. Yujito moved fluently, almost naturally, performed a back flip and crouching behind the flattened slab of sekiseki as the missiles of debris soared and zipped past her. One large piece, growing smaller with every moment, vanishing like sand thrown into the air, slammed against the exact spot where she sat but a moment ago and continued its journey a bare half-meter over her head. Smiling with glee, she looked over her protective barrier in a small hope to see him, the true him. The white smoke obscured all view, but it was quickly blown away to show a huge crater where the battle had been played out. Yujito hopped, skipped, and then jumped high, landing in a graceful motion right at the edge of the crater, no, more like a ravine. She saw but a glimpse of his true form. 9 long, sinewy tails flailed in the wind before disintegrating the very same way as the destroyed remnants of the Shinigami Bankai had vanished but a scant few moments before. The smoke gave way enough for her to see a lean muscular body encased in white carapace armor, which disintegrated much the same way as his 9 magnificent tails. The Shinigami lay on his side several meters away. His back was to her. His black shahakusho was torn and ragged and his zanpakuto was ripped from his grasp and was slowly regenerating to its sealed form several meters from the severely wounded death god's reach. He was still alive, Yujito noticed. Naruto, now fully back in his sealed state, minus his clothes, looked a little sheepish as his eyes fell upon the fallen Shinigami. Yujito noticed that he had completely regenerated everything on his exceptional frame, from his leanly muscled shoulders and strong arms to his six-pack stomach and strong legs. She quickly took a peek to his nether regions. Oh yes, everything was regenerated quite nicely. I guess I overdid it. He walked over to the unmoving Shinigami and lightly tapped him with his bare foot. You ain't dead, are you? She heard the Shinigami cough, spitting out a glob of blood before undoubtedly leveling a glare at the strongest hollow alive. Naruto didn't look nervous or scared by the glare, not in the slightest. If anything, he grinned. There you go. You're just chock full of piss and vinegar. What are you waiting for? The Shinigami asked in a severe, cold tone. You defeated me, so kill me. Naruto actually seemed to think about that. Nah, too easy. Instead, I'm just going to toss you back to where you belong with a message to your commander. I'm guessing it's that old bastard Yamamoto, right? How do you know him? He was a little fidgeting vice-captain of the king's court last time I saw him. Naruto replied, though his voice didn't contain a trace of nostalgia nor mirth. If anything, it was as cold as ice and twice as deadly. I have to find and beat the crap out of him. He hurt someone I deeply care for, and I can't allow him to just get by without one of her elder siblings giving him the beating of his life. Yujito was in complete agreement. If Naruto wasn't able to, then she would gladly take over that assignment. If she was not able to, she knew another 6 people who would gladly take the role. Naruto! His head snapped in her direction, and his shock was immediately replaced by a grin, a full genuine grin which made her blush. Yu-chan! You're up early. She was about to reply, but before she could muster any sort of retort he flashed over to her, caught her and hugged her in a tight, fierce embrace. The movement was so sudden and unexpected that she lost her footing, about to fall to the ground with him clinging to her, but he moved quicker, spinning around in midair so he would hit the ground and she would land softly on him. They both landed with a small pillow of sand. "You're a real sight for sore eyes," he said, kissing her a quick peck on the cheek and then wrapping her in a tighter embrace. "I miss you, kitten." Her rebuke died in her throat, indignant expression replaced by a soft, tender smile as she wrapped her arms around him and leaned her head against his chest, listening to his steady, rhythmic heartbeat. It had always had a calming effect on her, ever since he found her alone and half dead in the desert, a sign that they were above and beyond the hollows which they evolved from. "I miss you to Kit." They were like that for a while, both happy with nothing more than being in each other's company after so many millennia alone, both lost in the moment and happy to remain lost. Then it all ended. "Are you the only one up?" An explosion, followed by a pillar of sand, answered the question for her. Yujito looked up with narrowing eyes and a frown, while Naruto leaned back with a quizzical expression which slowly morphed into a full-blown grin. Gaara appeared in the center of the tornado as it dispersed and dissipated, looking down at the two of them with a quizzically raised brow. "Interrupt something, did I?" Yujito saw through his question a few moments sooner than Naruto, and gave a mischievous, sexy smirk. "Why, yes, as a matter of fact. So if you would push off for a few moments, we'll get all of this pent-up tension out of the way." Naruto didn't get it for a moment, and then he looked down to see that he was still naked. "Ah, I see. Give me a moment." The blonde smirk turned into a slightly disappointed pout as she got off of him. "Maybe later." Naruto rose, giving her a look which had a definite affirmative to it before snapping his fingers. A pair of baggy dark green pants and chain-mail black shirt formed over his form, black sandals seemingly forming from the sand itself. A long trench coat of eternal black was next to form, with black flames licking the hem and cuffs in a mass of reds, oranges and yellows. The blonde smirked as he looked it over, thoroughly more satisfied with his new choice of attire than the dreary white and black he had made spur of the moment before. "Much better," Naruto whooped as he cracked his neck muscles. "If anyone wants to change their colors, now would be the best time." Yujito was the first to change. She did nothing with her clothes physically. The baggy pants, chain-mail shirt and thick bomber jacket remained the same, but the color changed from whites and blacks to a deep dark azure with black trim. The chain-mail became a chrome shade of gray and her sandals' knee-high black boots took on a shade of shimmering black, completing her look. Gaara didn't even move as his clothes changed color. The white and black buttoned shirt, pants and boots changing color to a dark maroon with navy blue and faded green trim. His boots became the same shade of black as polished leather. A huge tan gourd, his own personal choice of weapon, appeared on his back, held in place by straps and satchels. Sand rose from the sand, flowing into the container until it was full, then a cork materialized from the air and plugged the gourd shut. Naruto grinned. Yujito grinned. Even Gaara allowed a small smile to grace his features. "Ready to go to war?" Naruto asked. "Definitely," Yujito agreed. "I could use some exercise," Gaara allowed. There was a snarl, followed by the sound of a huge fist hitting the earth. All three lords turned to see the giant of Asiro Espada, slowly rising to his feet, regaining his senses at long last. Naruto scowled at the creature, before turning back to Gaara. "Sorry for asking this, but could you deal with him?" The first lord looked at him for a moment before shrugging and taking a step forward. The cork of his gourd popped open and sand spilled out, mingling with the white grains at his feet. "I suppose I can. That's the old Emperor of the Eternal Sands I know. What about you two?" "Don't worry about us." Naruto grinned, even as a small explosion of kicked-up dust and sand made the arrival of a newcomer all the more abundantly clear. "We have a substitute." The dust and sand settled quickly, dissipating to show the wrinkled features of their newest awakened. Hair the color of dried blood and a beard, all shaggy and unkempt, was the first thing they noticed. His body was contained in a long-sleeved dark purple shirt and baggy pants of the same color. He also wore what looked like armor, a glistening black breastplate and gauntlets. "Rashi," Naruto greeted with a vicious grin. "You're up earlier than I thought, old man." Rashi, fourth lord, grinned back, just as vicious, just as brutal. "Couldn't have you young upstarts having all the fun, could I?" "I suppose not," Naruto replied before turning around as if to look at absolutely nothing. Someone's been messing with the Garganta." With lightning quickness his right hand seemed to pierce through the very air itself and twist sharply in a clockwise motion of a full 90 degrees. There was a moment of silence, and then the gateway between Hueco Mundo and the human world opened. An outline in the air beside Naruto, appearing as a black mouth with molar teeth, opened up beside him, easily big enough for all four of the lords to walk through with room for their personal space. Naruto nodded to himself before turning to Gaara. You can handle him, right? The First Lord gave him a withering glare. All right then, try and finish him off quickly. Naruto grinned viciously. We'll try and leave a few survivors for you. Then they were gone. The 9th, 4th and 2nd Lords stepped through the Garganta and continued on even as the gateway closed up behind them. Gaara eyed the space for a few moments before turning but full attention back to the most powerful of the Espada, who was now fully lucid and glaring down upon him with bloodshot eyes. Gaara sighed. The sand around him arose anew as a twisting, swirling tornado of will and power. His own spiritual pressure mingled and mixed with the very fabric of the sands all around him, and the First Lord took a deep breath as he savored every moment of his reconnection to the endless white sands of Hueco Mundo. Let's make this quick, shall we? It was a good day to be free. Chapter 4. Welcome to the Dance of Death. The giant roared a thunderous sound which shook the very landscape with its great power. Gaara had to admit that he was impressed that a hollow who had torn off his mask had gained so much strength. It was definitely nothing to laugh at. You're wasting your time, he sighed to himself. Once these sands are under my control, they can become as soft as a feather or as strong as steel. His body up to his waist was encased in sand, burying his legs and stopping him from moving any closer or farther away from him. His huge clawed hands had suffered a similar fate, encased in sand all the way up just past his elbows. Yami continued to struggle, but it was a wasted effort. There was nothing that could break through the sand when he put his full concentration into it. Only Naruto, Kurabi and Fu had the raw power to do it. The mammoth Arankar opened his maw, small dark red ball of acero forming on the tip of his tongue. He fired, a powerful blast which appeared to suck the color from the area, turning it into a mass of white light. The resulting blast left a mushroom-shaped cloud forming in the exact place where Gaara had stood, rising higher and higher until it almost touched the scarred ceiling of the fortress. Take that, trash! No answer, not for a few seconds. It took several tense moments. Then the cloud cleared. The light returned to normal, leaving the blackened sand of Ground Zero laid out before him. There was just one problem. Where the First Lord once stood was a sphere made out of pure blackened sand, easily large enough to fit someone of his size into. The outer layer of sand was blackened by the strike, the surface sand burned to the point where it became jagged pieces of glass. The ball opened as a flower would bloom, and sitting cross-legged on the platform was his opponent, completely unharmed and had the appearance of someone who was in a light meditation or sleep. The red-haired hollow opened his eyes, green orbs looking over the battleground right into the widened eyes of his opponent. Finished already? He asked, voice a bored drawl as he spoke. The platform of sand descended, seemingly merging with the greater desert before he stood up, dusted himself off and set a bored gaze upon the strongest of the Espada. As I have said, power means nothing here. As long as I am here, surrounded by sand, I cannot be defeated. Not even the 9th Lord was able to defeat me on my home ground. He stretched his hands out, and the sand exploded all around him into two streams of white, flowing around him like a miniature hurricane, faster and faster until they became blurs, then faster and faster until they formed a miniature twister. The sand streams dissipated, forming into a tornado of sand, ready to become a storm at the mental thought of its creator. If you are finished, then I will begin. He pointed his right hand right at the Espada's face, between the eyes. You probably won't survive this. Yami just stared, eyes widened and filled with an emotion he had not known for a long time. What was it? Anxiety, dread, fear. Yes, it was fear. Something blurred across the wastes, appearing right in front of him and driving a two-footed dropkick into his chin, breaking his jaw and sending him falling to the ground with a monumental explosion of sand as his body came to a stop. The perpetrator was sent flying by the recoil, but used the momentum to curl up her body, performing a trio of flawless somersaults before straightening herself out to land perfectly on the ground, feet together and arms stretched either side of her. Gaara frowned at the newcomer, allowing his sand to fall away from the now unconscious enemy. He was mine. You were taking too long, the woman replied dryly as she stood up and brushed a lock of turquoise-green hair from her face. You've missed them, he replied, crossing his arms across his chest and staring right at the unwelcome presence of his sister. Naruto, Yujito and Rashi have already moved on. If you want to catch up with them, I would suggest you go now and leave my prey to me. The woman smirked. 3,000 years in a coffin has done nothing in removing the stick from your ass, brother. And 3,000 years haven't dulled your willpower in getting in the way of my duels, sister. He responded with a tired sigh. If you wish to catch up to them, I would suggest you do so now. How long ago was that? 5 minutes, he replied. She groaned in what could only be perceived as dismal disappointment. They're probably there by now. Then go before they kill everyone, Gaara replied, lowering his head, closing his eyes and frowning in annoyance. You can't have that one. He is my prey. All right. She hiked before turning around and opening a gargantua with a simple flick of her hand. It opened, and she frowned. It feels stiff. Someone forced it shut, Gaara explained. She always did this to him. Her childish exuberance to the point of borderline hyper always rubbed him the wrong way. Now please leave. Grumpy much, she muttered with a cheeky smile before stepping through the open portal. It closed slowly, and she turned around, bent over and gave him a little wave before it shut, leaving him alone once again with an unconscious opponent, again. Gaara sighed, walked a few steps towards a slab of rock, sat down, and watched his unconscious opponent with a hawk's gaze. He could wait, as long as no one got in the way. Again. Apache, Sunsum, Milarose. She muttered their names as she turned her attention back to her opponent, a young child with cold eyes and snow-white hair who wore the uniform of a captain. She looked down upon the smoking bodies of her three subordinates, unmoving where they fell far below, and she was unable to feel their ryetsu. You fought well. The young captain's eyes widened, showing his piercing crystal blue eyes as she undid all of the buttons of her shirt, showing the remnants of her hollow mask to the world, stretching from just below her nose to form a complete set of jaws, armor around her neck and extending down to her breasts to just keep her decency. She needed to end this battle quickly. She needed to gain revenge for her subordinates. Her focus now was to kill the one who had killed them, that old man who wore the mark of the first division of the Shinigami hierarchy. She had sensed other lives winking out across the field of battle, which was the fake Karakura town. The Shinigami had decimated all of the fraction Barrigan Luzenbairn had taken with him into battle, and the second Espada was currently dueling a petite female Shinigami with shoulder-length black hair. The first Espa, Coyote Stark, seemed to be skirmishing with another two Shinigami wearing captain's jackets, one with long dark hair done up in a ponytail, and the other with long white hair. Both had dual swords. Neither of her superiors' numbers had activated their resurrection, but she would have to. Her opponent was strong, a match for her if she didn't get serious quickly. She may be one of the strongest, but she had no qualms with admitting that she was the weakest Espada in attendance. She accepted that, and that was why she had no problem releasing her resurrection first. Destroy, she muttered, pointing the blade in front of her yet slightly down, keeping her eyes on the still astonished Shinigami captain, and declared her sword's name to him. Tiburon. A cyclone of water appeared to form from the air, enveloping her in its depths and reshaping to form a cocoon. She waited barely a few seconds for her change to complete before cutting herself from it with a simple horizontal slice from her reformed lance-like blade, allowing the water to disperse and show him what she had become. Her clothes vanished. The remnants of her hollow mask had disintegrated from her face, reforming into a collar with extensions that still covered the nipples of her breasts. Knee-length white boots and elbow-length gloves came into existence. A spinal-like procession of bony protrusions formed vertically down her stomach from her breasts to just below her navel. Two spaulders appeared on her shoulders with long white ribbons, and her waist was covered with a line of bones resembling a miniskirt covering black undergarments. Her sword changed as well into a large weapon which resembled a shark's tooth, her hand protected by the guard. She struck with such speed that the young Shinigami didn't know what hit him until it was far too late. She cut through him with a diagonal stroke, barely aware of his widened, half-surprised, half-horrified gaze before she blurred past him. Tia Haribel didn't give him a second glance as she turned her attention back to their leader, aware of the difference in power between them but unwilling to back down. You, she said in a voice void of emotion, but her emerald eyes simmered with it. His gaze, those emotionless orbs, irritated her. I will punish you for ending their lives. She felt him approach with just enough time to parry, and watched with interest as that same young man who she thought she had cut down flew past her, the draconian wings of ice which represented his final release, his bankai, flapped as they brought him upright. She should have known that a captain would never go down so easy. Temporarily putting her revenge on hold, she gave chase to the Shinigami, her own weapon at the ready. She was within 20 meters of him when she felt it, and immediately peeled off to the side just in time to dodge the gargantua when it opened. Haribel threw herself back, several dozen meters before stopping and surveying the opening portal to Hueco Mundo with astonishment. Lord Aizen had sealed the access way. There was no way that anyone else could force it open. Then the voice came, a gravelly voice which echoed through the gargantua into the battlefield. It was so loud that it brought all of the combatants to a standstill. Even Lord Aizen, imprisoned in the Captain Commander's flaming prison, and his two Shinigami lieutenants, Jin Ikamaru and Kaname Tozen, looked over. If you two don't shut up, I will turn us around and drop you off back home. the voice shouted in agitation. Do you understand? They walked out of the portal, seemingly unaware that every pair of eyes were staring right at them. There were 3 of them, walking in a formation similar to a V. In the lead was a tall man with spiky blonde hair, tan skin, piercing ocean blue eyes and whisker-like streaks across his cheeks. Whether they were tattoos or scars she was unsure. The 2 flanking him seemed as different as night and day. One was a woman who looked in the prime of her youth. The other was a man who looked near the end of his life. The woman was beautiful with long pale blonde hair tied into a braid by white cloth, pale white skin, slanted eyes which were a dark brown. She was curvaceous, even if the dark blue jacket she wore covered her upper body. The skin-tight jeans and leather boots showed her lower form off a little too well. The man was old, yet there was not a hint of gray in his cut short hair or goatee, which was both a deep maroon red, but his tan skin showed the wrinkles of age, not as bad as the second Espada, but they still showed he seemed the oldest one of the trio. He was the shortest one as well, with a bulky build which contradicted the curvaceous build of the female, or the physically fit, muscled form of the leading male. I'm not being forced back from this one kid, the old man growled before thumbing over to the female. But the blonde bimbo can go. Who are you calling a blonde bimbo? The female replied with a dangerous edge in her voice. You hairy, old, senile baboon. I resent that. The old man snarled before giving himself a look over. I am not that hairy. I need a drink. The taller male muttered with urgency as he turned away from his bickering compatriots to have a look around. There is stuff that you 2 said that cannot be removed with anything but excessive amounts of alcohol. He then seemed to realize where they were, and the lead blonde took one long look around at the audience before smiling. What can I say? I can't take them anywhere. Harabel watched on, bewildered, as he turned back to his compatriots who were still giving each other glares which could probably melt steel. All right, you 2 break it up, we're here. Really? The female said, voice dripping with sarcasm. I hadn't noticed. Not surprising with that head of hot air you have there. The old man muttered. Bite me, ape. Enough, the leader said with slight annoyance as he raised his hand and snapped his fingers, bringing a high-backed throne of white marble with intricate carvings into existence. He sat on the throne, crossed his legs and leaned his head against his right hand. His 2 compatriots hesitated before stepping forward and calling identical thrones to levitate in midair by snapping their fingers. They both sat down and looked on. Take your pick, who do you want to fight? Harabel felt it. Their confidence. Their conviction. Their power. Yet they did not feel like Arrancar. They felt like hollows, true hollows, like she herself felt to her senses when she was a Vasto Lord, before she met Sosuke Aizen and became an Arrancar, only multiplied by a numerous scale of 10 to 100-fold in strength. They were here for a single purpose. To destroy. Now this is interesting. Jin looked over to his superior, watching as he looked up to the sky, or what would have been the sky if it wasn't for Yamamoto's prison he was holding them in. The turncoat wondered how Aizen could sense anything beyond this prison when he could not, but apparently he could because there he was with that common small smile on his face. You know what's happening out there, I take it? Jin asked with that same serpentine smile. Indeed, something very unexpected has happened, Aizen replied as he looked over in his first lieutenant's direction. Yes, something very unexpected indeed. Will it be a problem? Tozen asked. It will be, Aizen replied, smile reforming into a frown, which was rare for him. Anything which could make Sosuke Aizen show even the slightest signs of doubt was a worthy opponent indeed. We will have a tougher fight of it than I thought. The rulers of the Hollow have returned. The 9 lords? Tozen asked with a skeptical frown. Indeed, so it wasn't an old children's tale after all, Jin muttered before looking up at the jagged edges of flame and smiling. This could be fun. It is a setback, Tozen corrected, looking right at Ikamaru. It is a small setback, and it may work to our favor, the renegade captain replied. There are only 3 of them here, others may be coming, but they might even out the balance. He watched as the 3 of them settled into their thrones, both unnerved, intrigued and horrified by what he saw. Genryusai Shigakuni Yamamoto was not a man who was easily startled, but this was such a time. It took him a while to realize who these 3 were, but once he recognized their faces he saw the horrors they could unleash upon the battlefield with a very real dread. He recognized all 3 of them. Yujuto, the 2nd Lord, the Azure Cat, the Lady of the Bloody Claws. Rashi, the 4th Lord, the Killer Baboon, Master of Lava and Flame. Naruto, the 9th Lord, the Firstborn, the Emperor of the Foxes. As terrifying as it was in seeing any of the mythical 9 lords in the flesh, seeing him was by far the worst of all. He still remembered that battle, fought 3,000 years ago, which destroyed so much in the time span of 3 days. How one of those 9 tails could turn a forest into a wasteland with a single stroke if angered, and he was angry that day, furious that day. He had cared not for what he would destroy, because everything had been taken from him. His brothers and sisters, his chosen warriors and his mate, yes, that day he would have destroyed Hueco Mundo if he could have. It was not wise to face this man's wrath. But a lot has happened since then, and he was not the man he remembered himself as. He was far stronger now than he was then. So Yamamoto remained where he was and waited for the released masters of Hollow to make the first move, and then find a way to counter them. The first 8, while all powerful in their own right, were not the main threat. He was. The 9th Lord was always and always will be the main threat. The 9th Lord's eyes leveled upon him and flashed an angry crimson. Yamamoto simply returned his glare for what seemed an eternity before he relented. He still remembered, of course he remembered. But he had no regrets. The woman was a hollow, and all hollows were the same menace. That's what he told himself, so he could sleep better at night. I love you. He closed his eyes, forcing that sweet voice to the farthest corners of his mind and slamming it into a box, never to hear her ever again. He had used her to weaken them, nothing more. He knew she was the youngest and the easiest deceived. He felt nothing for her, nothing. The look of betrayal in her eyes as he turned against her. How when she saw his intent, how the life which was once in those gray orbs suddenly went blank. Her voice still hounded him, even to this day, with tears rolling down her cheeks and pain in her eyes. Why? 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 He shut his eyes tightly. She was a hollow. What did she know of love? I have a bone to pick with you. He looked up to lock eyes with him, most powerful of the 9 lords, and by far the most protective. When he heard what he had done to her, he had given him that criss-crossing scar on his forehead. When he heard of what his 3 seniors had done to the second, he killed them without mercy. When he heard of the Soul King's ambition, he fought him for 3 days and nights without rest or reprieve. But I'll wait, he added as he leaned back into his chair. If she isn't here to avenge herself, then I'll have to do it for her. It was then that the gargantuan opened, and a single figure stepped out. She was petite yet tall, with brown skin the color of chocolate, which contrasted with light green hair and orange eyes the color of vibrant amber. She wore a sleeveless white shirt which cut off at the midriff and a pair of short pants which cut off at the knees, knee-high white jackboots. She took a deep breath, grinned and stepped forward, snapping the fingers of her left hand to call upon her own high-backed, white marble throne beside the second lord, which she immediately sat upon. Didn't miss the party, did I? She asked with a wide, childish smile. On the contrary, the 9th replied to the 7th. You're right on time. I was just telling Yujito and Rashi to take their pick of who they want to fight, eldest first. That's not fair, she replied with a pout. That's only because you're the youngest here, Naruto countered with a teasing smile. Don't worry. You'll get your opponent. Before she could reply, the other female, Yujito, leaned forward, smiled and pointed to the female Espada and Toshiro. I want those too. Suit yourself. Naruto shrugged before turning to Rashi. And you? The 4th lord frowned before setting his gaze upon the Espada and the visage of an old man and Captain Suiphone. I want those too. Naruto grinned widely before turning to the 7th lord. You see, you still get the strongest ones. Good, she replied as she looked over at the long-haired Espada, as well as Captains Shunsui Kairaku and Jeshiro Yukitake. I look forward to it. The 9th lord's eyes fell upon Yamamoto then, and bored into him. Let's see how long they last. The 2nd, 4th and 7th lords all piped up in agreement before standing up, their thrones disintegrating behind them, and took off towards their chosen battle zones, all the while the 9th lord kept eye contact with Yamamoto, unmoving and intent. The intent behind the gaze was crystal clear. Who is the best? He had complete confidence in his brethren. Could Yamamoto say the same? Chapter 5, Sharpen Your Claws. The Zero came from nowhere, a beam of crimson light aimed right for him. Toshiro Hitsugaya, captain of 10th Company, was just able to bring one of his ice wings around to shield him from the strike. It was just barely enough to stop it, burning through to the final layer of ice and turning his wing into a smoldering wreck of what it once was. He gritted his teeth, concentrated and froze the moisture in the air to reform his ruined wing. He had just finished when he felt her presence behind him, but it was too late to move. The back of her foot collided with the back of his head, sending the young captain into freefall to the ground far below. Hitsugaya shook his head to dispel the pain and nausea before spreading his wings and forcing himself to a stop. He flapped his wings once, then twice to right himself, and had just gotten his bearings when he felt her approach at high speed. He spun around, and was just able to freeze his right forearm in time to strengthen it enough to absorb the blow from her flying heel kick. He felt the ice crack, just taking the worst of the impact before shattering like a pane of glass. The momentum sent him skidding back, using his spiritual pressure to keep him upright. She didn't let up, and went right after him in a blur of motion, striking at him with open-handed palm and finger strikes, and each time he was just able to block and deflect her blows. The hollow wasn't even using a weapon. Instead, she just attacked him with her fists and her feet, trusting in her hierro, her steel skin, to protect her from any counterattack. Toshiro took several steps back, freezing his forearms to continue blocking the blonde-haired hollow's continuous palm strikes. Then he saw it, a mistake. He parried a palm strike, noticing her overextend herself, and lashed out with a stab from his zanpakuto. His stab met with air, for she seemed to spin around him, small smile on her face as she danced out of his field of vision. Then she hit him with an open palm strike to the back of his head, a slap really, which sent the young captain stumbling forward a few steps before spinning around to focus a cold glare in her direction. She smiled so wide that her eyes shut, arms behind her back as she purred. "Ah, you're so cute." His glare intensified, but he did not respond nor rise to her bait. Instead, he quickly went over what had happened between them so far. She was fast, incredibly fast, and she knew how to fight hand to hand with a grand professionalism born from years and years of training and honing her skills. She was also a tactician, leaving herself open on purpose because she knew exactly where he would strike and how to turn it to her advantage. "I am not cute," he said as he blurred behind her, and stabbed out with his sword. He noticed her eyes widen ever so slightly before she stopped the strike, but it was how she stopped him that made his eyes widen in dread. She grabbed the blade with her hand, her bare hand, and leveled a soft smile his way, as if she were about to talk to a child. "Sure you are, if you think that strike was going to surprise me." She then slapped him on both sides of the head, allowing the ringing of his ears to disorient him as she performed a somersault, bringing her foot down on the back of his head. He once again went into freefall, spinning and struggling to fight through the pain of her dual strike and stop his continuous head-over-heels spin. It was then that the espada came in, aiming a stab right for her side with her huge shark-toothed blade. Yujito sidestepped the stab and spun in a similar manner that she did with the Shinigami before. The Arankar ducked the strike aimed for the back of her head and countered with a swipe from her sword, which the pure-blooded hollow parried with the side of her right hand. A kick to the Arankar's side made her sputter, a slap to the side of her head disoriented her, and a heel palm to her jaw made her stagger. Then came a bala, creating the ball of condensed crimson energy with her left hand as she performed the uppercut. Yujito used the moment to slam the bala blast into Haribel's abdomen. The resultant explosion sent the Tressera flying back, slamming into a skyscraper and piercing through the steel. The silence barely lasted a few seconds after the crash died away, then a large zero exploded from the structure. Yujito was just able to spin to the side, feeling the heat of the beam as it singed her clothes. Then Tia Haribel exploded from the smoking wreckage which was once the outer superstructure of the skyscraper, flying at near supersonic speed as she rushed into the fray, sword point aimed right for Yujito's back. The second lord jumped up, watching with lucid vision as the blade flew right under her. She looked up, eyes widening when she came face to face with the third espada, and the zero forming in her open mouth. The resultant explosion became a thin line of blackish crimson, followed by a mass of smoke which obscured all vision. It cleared within moments, revealing a wide-eyed espada and Yujito, arms crossed in front of her, forearms smoldering from the point-blank zero, and when she looked over them her dark eyes were sharp and glaring right at her. The skin was already healing as she brought them down to her sides. "Well done," she said with a dangerous smile. "You've gotten my attention, young blood." The roar was their only warning before a dragon of pure ice flew up towards the two hollows with speed. The red eyes were their only other warning. The espada was able to perform a quick sonido to get out of the way, but the pure blood hollow remained where she was, watching as the creature approached. It collided with her, creating an explosion of steam and shattered ice. It wasn't long before the mist cleared, and when it did the young captain's eyes widened in surprise. His dragon had been cut neatly in two, from the tip of its nose to the tip of its tail. The blonde-haired hollow was several meters behind the remains of his strike, bent over and holding what looked like a long-poled war scythe in her pale hands. She righted herself and swiped the scythe, sending drops of water and crushed ice into the air. The dragon shattered the moment she finished her movement. Now that she had righted herself, Hitsugaya could get a better view of her new weapon. It was a long pole, 2 meters long, ending in a wickedly curved blade, similar to the scythe of the Reaper he had seen in ancient human books. The weapon was as white as a hollow's armor, except for the serrated edge of the blade which was a light shade of gray. The Vasto Lord gripped her scythe with both hands and leaned back, preparing for a swing. A smirk was on her lips as she spoke. Nice trick, but now it's my turn! The blade of the scythe sparked with azure energy, then she swung and the energy exploded into life. A feline shape appeared mid-flight, taking on the form of a large feline cat, a lioness or a tiger. He couldn't tell, but he knew if that hit him he would be burned to a cinder. The flames roared in anger as he swung his sword, releasing another of his ice serpents just in time to meet the strike. It wasn't nearly as strong, but it might be enough to deflect. He was right. The dragon and the lioness met, and Hitsugaya watched as the azure flames melted away his ice. The bulk of the energy had been deflected and the lioness lost her form as the flames exploded into several directions, but it was not enough for him to get away without a scratch. The young captain folded his wings around himself, and felt the heat as the flames slammed into them, melting layers of ice before they finally dissipated. He opened his wings, noticing that they were smoking from the impact, water dribbling from the draconian shape. The young captain chanced to look at the 3 flowers behind him, symbols which represented how long he could keep his Bankai active, and noticed with a little trepidation that 2 of them had vanished. He needed to end this quickly. Not bad for a whelp. He spun around, bringing up his sword just in time to deflect the swing which could have sliced him neatly in 2. It only took him a split second to remember that the weapon she was wielding wasn't a sword. Her smile confirmed his remembrance for him. Not bad, kiddo, but it's not a sword you're dealing with here. She pulled the pole of her weapon hard, and Toshiro knew that the serrated edge of the blade was coming right for the back of his neck. He ducked out of pure instinct, feeling the blade slice through his silver locks of hair. But he was unable to know what came next. The speed in which she created a zero was almost unbelievable, yet there it was, on the tip of her finger, a tiny ball of blackish crimson, ready to be released. Hitsugaya tried to fold his wings around himself, to give him some protection. He was too late by a second. She released her zero, creating an explosion of crimson light. The young captain fell from the smoke, vapors trailing him as he and his shattered wings of ice, now in several pieces, fell to the urban sprawl below. Yujito watched him for a few moments before sighing and turning around, just in time to see the form of the maskless hollow, standing ready to meet her. You could have attacked me while my back is turned, Yujito pointed out. Harabel glared at her for a moment, as if the idea was insulting. I will not kill a foe when her back is turned to me. The blonde smirked. An honorable hollow. I thought you were all extinct. She did not reply for a moment, spreading her legs and raising her weapon in preparation for battle. You will not get into the way of Lord Aizen's ambitions. Lord Aizen. Yujito repeated slowly, deliberately, before gritting her teeth and glaring at Harabel in something akin to rage. You may not have lost your honor, but you have lost your self-respect. The Trassera Espada's only visible display of emotion was in her eyes, which simmered with sudden anger. Lord Aizen saved us from our fates to die in that wasteland. He granted us great power and led us against the Shinigami. He made you break your mask. Yujito countered with a flare of Ryetsu. A mask is a symbol of what you are, where you come from. You do not rip it off and throw it away. Her statement surprised Harabel. Her eyes only widened slightly, but it was clear as the world to Yujito. You lie. Do I? Yujito asked, before putting her hand to her chest. Let me tell you something, young blood. A hollow who becomes Vasto Lord, true Vasto Lord, does not rip off their mask, they take it off. To learn to be able to take off and put on your mask at will, to find a way to fill the hole where your heart once was. That is the symbol of a true Vasto Lord. Doubt, just the slightest flickers of what she had said sunk into this young creature, but they were quickly replaced by anger. She leaned her sword arm back and released a torrent of water in Yujito's direction with enough pressure to slice her in half. Through it all she spoke in a low, dangerous voice. You lie! Yujito leaned back, brought her scythe over her head and swung it down just as the water came within range. The tip of the blade of her weapon pierced through the tip of the strike at the precise moment, cutting the torrent of water into 2 alternate directions which continued on their path, missing the second lord completely before dissipating in the air several dozen meters away. Harabel watched, stunned, as her strike was deflected with such surgical precision that it should be impossible. Her eyes widened further when the form of her opponent was encompassed by azure flames and her spiritual pressure increased to thrice its original level. She straightened, showing that her dark eyes had changed color to a feral azure. It seems that you have not just lost your self-respect, but your respect for your elders as well, she said in a dangerously feral tone. Very well, child. I will beat the respect back into you. Both were forced to use their spiritual pressure to melt and destroy the ice, but by then the young captain was already on Yujito, seeing her as the main threat. She moved, but wasn't able to get out of the way in time. The blade pierced the left side of her abdomen, but wasn't able to go any deeper when her left hand gripped onto the still exposed blade. Their eyes met, cold turquoise against simmering chocolate brown. La Gata! A blast of condensed water resembling the blade Haribel carried soared through the air right towards the two. Hitsugaya was able to disengage his sword and jump away with a flap of his Bankai created draconian wings. Yujito was unable to, the blast slamming right into her with a deafening explosions and a mass of steam. Both Shinigami and Erinka watched the mist, not moving until it dissipated to show the blonde hollow and her condition. She was doubled over, hacking and coughing, and when she looked up blood was dribbling from the corners of her mouth. It looked like her hero was strong only to a certain point. The only problem was that it took one of their main attacks to break through her steel skin. Not bad at all. She smiled, showing blood staining her teeth. Well, as Naruto always says, let's go wild. There was a moment of eerie silence, and then the spiritual pressure exploded with such overwhelming force both the Shinigami and the Erinka had to visibly struggle to remain upright. The force unleashed was almost crushing, like gravity itself had increased tenfold, to such a strength that their vision went into blacks, whites and grays for a time before they became used to it. Both knew what was coming, and from just feeling her release her power they knew they had to stop her before it was too late. Hitsugaya acted first, swinging his sword and unleashing a long sinewy dragon made of pure, solid ice. The creature moved with speed and velocity, flying towards the hollow with the simple intent of freezing her in place. Haribel was barely a split second later, pointing her sword right at the second lord and concentrating a great deal of spiritual pressure into it, shooting out a tooth-shaped bullet of condensed water with almost blurring speed. It was the condensed water bullet that hit her first, a grazing hit but enough to spin her in midair and lost her concentration. The dragon came next, slamming into her form, and encasing her in a solid sphere of ice. Her delicate, beautiful features frozen in wide-eyed surprise before the block of ice began a long descent to the ground, where shattering into thousands of pieces was the only conceivable end. Naruto opened his eyes and yawned, leaning against his chair idly as he felt the sudden dimming of spiritual pressure. He looked over, seeing a block of ice containing a figure falling to the ground at high speed, well aware that any normal human would shatter alongside the ice he or she was encased in. "It's over already, is it?" he muttered as he watched the ice fall, and then looked up to see the young Shinigami and the quite exotically beautiful Erinka once again began to duel each other. Bullets of condensed water and writhing, exquisitely carved dragons of ice were once again being exchanged as both tried to hit each other. In their minds the threat posed by his sister had now been avoided, gravity would do the rest of the work for them. The other battles were progressing similarly, his siblings were underestimating their opponents. None of them had released their true forms yet, and he was beginning to get slightly annoyed with them. Knowing that they were playing around, testing their opponents through jabs and strikes. When were they going to get serious? It seemed that one of them heard him, for he once again felt his eldest sibling's spiritual pressure explode, watching as the ice encasing her cracked and shattered under the sudden and powerful Ryetsu unleashed upon the world. She broke free with a mighty roar, and he noticed that she was about to release her true power, her inner hollow, as it were. Rashi may call her a bimbo, but to Naruto's eyes Yujito was one of the smartest of his siblings. The old saying of blondes being dumb was a myth. "Over, huh?" he muttered before breaking into a feral grin, eyes glowing red for a moment before returning to their usual ocean blue. As if. She landed roughly on the flat roof of a multi-story structure, wrapped her arms around her sides and shivered violently. "Cold," she muttered as she took a shaky breath, looking up just as her chocolate eyes morphed from chocolate brown to unnatural azure, round pupil becoming a thin sickle. "I hate being cold." Nights in Hueco Mundo were cold, bitterly cold. She had almost died from it when she had first awakened as a Vasto Lord. Naruto had saved her from such an end, but ever since then she had an abhorrence hatred for being cold. When she was active she was fine, running and jumping kept her warm, but when she needed to sleep she used to either huddle together with her chosen or go to Naruto's fortress where she knew he would keep her very, very warm. If cold ever became a solid sentient being she would fall upon him and take pleasure in ripping him to bloody pieces. That was how much she hated the cold. There was a spark, which became a mass of flames, darkest azure, which encompassed her form, melting what was left of the ice clinging to her frame. The flames flickered and writhed as if they had a life of their own, and the heat was so intense that both the Shark Empress and the 10th Division captain could feel it as if they were standing right next to it. The flames seemed to condense, hiding her form in the dark flickering azure. "Sharpen your claws." Her voice could be heard over the flames, calm and confident. "Matatabi." The fire bulged and exploded, showering sparks and disintegrating flames in every direction. When it cleared they saw her. Her clothes had vanished, and in its place was form-fitting white armor, clinging to her body like a second skin, with the only opening being a V-neck which went from her shoulders, down her chest and stopping at her navel, showing side views of her breasts. Her fingers elongated into vicious, curved blade-like claws mirrored by her feet. Two long feline tails flailed in the high-speed winds the same way as her wild blonde locks, which had exploded from their confines and flew freely in the wind. There was no sign of any armor around her head, but her ears grew and became pointed. Her features changed as well, her canines elongated into long sharp fangs. Her eyes became glowing azure with sickle-shaped pupils. It all came together to give her a truly feral appearance. She leaned back, puffed up her chest as she took in air and released a feline roar which shook the surrounding area. Now her two opponents had no choice but take notice as her roar called up a shockwave of gale-force wind in every direction. Loud. He turned his head in the direction of the noise, realizing that one of the female hollows, whatever they were, had released her true form, though whether she called it resurrection or not was up for debate. She is very loud. She was always loud, from the first moment I met her. He turned his skull, devoid of skin and blood and cartilage, to the owner of the voice. The old man with maroon-red hair was sitting on top of an outhouse as he looked right at him, eyes not leaving his, as if daring him to make the first move. How he looked right at him without fear or hesitation, how he carried himself like he was his equal, no, his superior. It was insulting. The Shinigami female was on the other side of the roof, panting and in obvious pain. Not surprising considering she had lost an arm barely a few moments ago, but she did not die screaming like he had hoped. Instead, she ordered her lieutenant to cut off her arm before it spread to the rest of her, a bold move, but a smart one. She would dodge his deathly grip for a few moments longer. "Aren't you going to fight now, trash?" he asked the question, pointing his bulky war axe right at him. "It would be boring if you allowed me to kill you." "You've got some balls, young blood," the man replied as he jumped down from his perch. "To think that some upstart like you can talk down to one of your betters is laughable." "One of my betters, you say?" Barrigan asked, voice agrowl as he spoke in a low, dangerous tone. "Watch your tongue, trash. I am the God King of Hueco Mundo. Only because we weren't there to put you in your place," the old man replied as he took a step forward. "Naruto is very angry with you, something about letting some Shinigami with dreams too big for his head beating you and taking over his fortress." "His fortress?" the second Espada asked. He probably would have raised his brow if he could. Rashi threw his head back and laughed. "What? Did you think those ruins appeared out of thin air? You see him?" Barrigan looked up, and if he had eyes they would narrow dangerously as he spotted a high-backed white throne. The man was slouching in the chair, and the second Espada guessed he was either asleep or watching the battles before him without much interest. It was almost as if he knew the conclusion to these skirmishes before they even began. "The fortress belonged to the boss," Rashi stated. "And he wants it back." "Then why doesn't he face me himself?" "Because I asked him if I could have a crack at you first," Rashi replied with a glare which could melt steel. "It is unbecoming for the boss to take on an underling like you." "Underling?" Barrigan asked with barely restrained rage. "Yes, underling." The fourth lord nodded in agreement. "If a fellow hollow, a vasto lord, squatted in his domain he wouldn't mind, but you allowed his fortress to be taken by a Shinigami and he is not pleased." There was a flash of crimson light, followed by an explosion. Barrigan spun around in time to see his own throne blown to hundreds of pieces by a Siro fired from the so-called boss's hand. His hand was still smoking as he looked down and fixed the second Espada with a cold gaze, one which sent a chill up his spine by its intensity and will. "Like I said," Rashi stated as he released his own spiritual pressure, watching as weak superstructure and masonry collapsed at the slightest release of his power. "The boss is not happy. To him you are undeserving of a stool, let alone a throne, and I have volunteered to end you on his behalf." "Why couldn't I fight her?" Joshiro sighed before looking over at his oldest friend and confidant. "Probably because you'd be trying to flirt with her instead of fight her." Shunsui thought about it for a moment before nodding his head solemnly. "Yeah, but I'd still rather fight her than what we're up against now. I mean this solemn-looking guy, his little sister, and the kid over there." Several meters away, the Primera Espada, Coyote Stark, yawned for a long moment before folding his arms. "Sorry about that, but it's not like I want to be here either." "You two are almost exactly alike, I swear." Joshiro muttered more in shock than anything else. "The only difference seems to be that this guy doesn't seem to have a libido." "You assholes!" The Arrancar girl by his side shouted angrily, a little too angrily. "He's just lazy. I don't need you sticking up for me, Lilinet." "Another scary thought," Shunsui said before looking between the Primera Espada's fraction and the childlike hollow several meters away. Am I the only one who doesn't see a resemblance here? It was true, although the white-haired captain didn't like to admit it. The child standing beside the errand car and the girl, currently several dozen meters up, bent over, and looking at them with an almost unnervingly quizzical gaze, resembled each other quite closely. The hair, which was only a few shades different in color, the build, which was similar, even the style of clothes was the same. The only conceivable differences between these two were the eyes, and their skin color. The skin of the girl beside the first espada was pale, like she had never felt the sun, while the other one was tan like she had never been away from the sun. Even their childish mannerisms were the same. Clones, Joshiro muttered. They're like clones born on different sides of the planet. Are they twins? No way, the errand car roared, pointing at the other girl. I've never seen her before in my li. Hey, pay attention to me. The tan girl was sitting down cross-legged, uncaring of the world around her, watching her blonde-haired sibling with a smile. She's a little angry. There's a difference, Joshiro muttered. What? Shunsui asked. Attention spans, the white-haired Shinigami replied deadpan. We are not related, Lillinet roared. Now then, Fu said bubbly as she straightened up and stretched with a purr of delight as her joints popped. I think I should follow my sister's example, and win this as quickly as possible. And why is that? Stark asked as he fell into a fighting stance, hand on his sword. The Shinigami felt the change in her demeanor as well, as sudden and different as looking at the sun and the moon within seconds of each other. Their hands were on the hilts of their zanpakuto within a split second of the change, ready and waiting. Because whoever beats their opponents fastest gets a crack at the old guy up there. She pointed right at Yamamoto. And I want to kick his ass for what he did to my little sister. You're not the youngest? Lillinet asked with a frown. Whatever gave you that idea? Fu smiled a mischievous smile, but the smile seemed off with her reply, and it gave all in attendance a chill. Her roar was what made her presence known to her two opponents. That she was not out of the game yet, not by a long shot. If that didn't gain their attention, then her explosion of spiritual pressure would undoubtedly do the trick. They reacted fast as two opponents of their power would be able to. The Shinigami spun around, swinging his zanpakuto, releasing another one of his ice dragons which roared and soared down on a collision course with the roof she was standing on. The maskless hollow pointed her shark-tooth-shaped weapon at the same moment, releasing another one of her condensed water bullets. Both slammed onto the roof at the same precise moment, the power behind the combined effort enough to obliterate the concrete slab and at least another 3 floors below it. The explosion sent masonry, concrete, and ripped apart pieces of broken furniture in all directions. It was an impressive show of strength. It was just not strong enough. She exploded from the cloud with enough speed to blow a hole through the smoke, moving so fast that her entire form blurred into an almost incomprehensible shape. The Shinigami was just able to bring his zanpakuto up to block before a clawed hand of wickedly sharp, curved blades collided with his weapon with a screech of steel. The force behind the blow sent him skidding backwards by several dozen meters before managing to come to a stop, watching as the feline queen's claws scrapped against his sword in a hail of sparks. Then she vanished, using a sonito or a shuinpa or whatever she called it to come up right behind him with such speed that there was no time to dodge, no time to even breathe. Her foot collided with his back, forcing the air from his lungs in a great gasp before he flew forwards with such speed that it was nearly half a kilometer before he was able to stop. She did not relent, but instead changed targets towards the startled errand car. She moved so fast that Harabelle wasn't even able to bring up her weapon to defend herself. The two collided, the second lady grappling her and flew. The espada so dazed by the strike that she was barely able to struggle as they shot down towards the ground at supersonic speed to a multi-story building below. She released her target, and the third espada pierced through the thick concrete roof, breaking through floor after floor until she collided with the concrete slab of the foundations, and made a large crater from the impact. She landed on the roof so hard that she created a crater on its surface before tapping her foot against the wrecked roof structure and propelling herself back into the air, watching as the ground where she once stood collapsed from her spiritual pressure alone. She smiled, took a deep breath and laughed jovially before taking off again at supersonic speed, right towards the Shinigami captain who was even now preparing another one of his ice dragons. He brought the sword over his head and slashed down, releasing not one but 5 dragons of pure ice which flew right at her. She performed a barrel roll, missing the first, steep climb to miss the second, sharp fall to miss the third and fourth, and finally an increase in speed to dodge the fifth. She then flew on, 5 Asian dragons of ice following behind, claws of her right hand coming together to form a spear to pierce the young captain, in the shoulder mind. He was too young to die. Her claws pierced right through his shoulder in an explosion of ice, no blood, and she realized that he had replaced himself with an ice clone just before it exploded, sending deadly sharp shards of frozen water in every direction like a grenade. Yujito was peppered by the minuscule shards, but her armor was good enough to block or deflect them. She did gain a small cut on her left cheek though, and that irritated her. He came right behind her, bringing his Zanpakuto down in a diagonal overhead slash. She spun around with blurring speed, blocking it with the razor-sharp claws of her right hand. Not bad, young one, you have potential. There was an explosion of masonry and concrete as the Aaron car flew from the building, which proceeded to collapse under the strain of her spiritual pressure. She roared in anger before driving her sword arm back and pointing it to the sky, screaming a single word. Cascada! She then pointed her shark-toothed blade right at the two of them and fired a shot of water, which sucked the vapor out of the air and expanded, larger and larger until it became something akin to a tidal wave of condensed water, destroying everything in its path. Several blocks worth of houses were swallowed up by the blast. Hitsugaya's eyes widened at the display of raw power. Yujito's reaction was the opposite. She smirked at the display. She has some potential too. Before Toshiro could come up with some sort of retort, she exploded into motion, kicking him right in the midsection and sending him soaring in an out-of-control spin to the ground below. She didn't even wait to see it he would right himself, instead shooting off at near supersonic speed right for the tidal wave which was still coming right at them. She moved so fast that she did more than become a blur, elongating to almost twice her usual height. She hit the water and pierced through. The hole lasted for a second before closing up again. She continued on at speed, and Harabelle barely saw her as she brought her clawed fist back and brought it forward again, smirk firmly on her full lips as her punch collided with her fellow Hollow's face. For a split second everything seemed to go still, then Harabelle was sent spinning through the air at the speed of sound, slamming into another multi-story structure and piercing through the concrete, at least 2 floors and out through the adjacent concrete wall. She landed on a street, creating a crater of broken concrete as she skidded at least 10 meters before coming to a stop. The second lady straightened and smiled. 1,000 years too early, young blood. She caught Hitsugaya's slash with her right hand, claws enclosing around the blade as her feral azure eyes bored into his simmering turquoise. Youth was a wonderful thing, not even able to wait for his elders to finish their quarrel. She brought her free-clawed hand back with blurring supersonic speed, preparing for a blow. There was a blur of motion, and Yamamoto was there. Yujito was barely able to half-turn before she noticed him, those cold eyes looking right into hers and his Zanpakuto aimed right for her heart. She may be one of the fastest, but the old man had definitely become a lot stronger since the last time she fought him. Steel sliced through flesh. Blood ran. Chapter 6, Collision Course. Berrigan realized the flaw the moment the old man rushed into the attack, creating a pole-shaped staff from thin air and planting a strike into his kidney with one powerful thrust. He realized at the moment he had to move himself to block the hollow strike. He brought his war axe down, hearing the screech of metal on metal as it drove the staff to the concrete. His special ability, an ability he carried as the personification of one of the 10 aspects of death, the personification of old age, an ability to age anything within a radius of his sight and focus into nothing more than bone. His new opponent must know nothing of his ability to turn any opponent within his personal space into dust. That would be his downfall. Fool! The second Espada grinned as he unleashed his senescentia, his ability to rot and deteriorate every object, living and not, around him, turning the target into dust. The old creature was keeping his distance for now, still in a ready stance, his staff held in both hands as if he were preparing to use it. Then he vanished without a trace, removing himself from Berrigan's sight. It was futile. No one could break through his impenetrable defense, one which had the ability to rot everything that got within range. The second this unknown opponent tried to attack, he would be caught, and the battle would end. Then he would kill that annoying Shinigami captain, and her lieutenant, in one fell stroke. Something slammed into the back of his head, forcing him to stagger forwards a couple of steps before whirling around to see what had struck him. He came face to face with the end of the staff, which had extended to thrice the width it had been previously, and the owner, who was smirking just out of the range of his senescentia. "I'm guessing you're wondering how my staff can get through that defense of yours without rotting away, right?" The Hollow asked with a grin, ignoring the murderous intent which seemed to enshroud all of the Espada's being. No one struck him, the God King of Hueco Mundo, like that. Anyone who did had a death wish. "It's really quite simple, we do not age." "What?" "It's rather simple," Rashi replied as his staff reverted back to its normal length. He spun it in his right hand, watching as it became a circle of blurred color before stopping the spin. "We are the founding fathers and mothers of Hueco Mundo. We created the 10 aspects of death, as well as all of the techniques and abilities you young bloods take for granted." "I am tired of your rambling," Baragon snarled, gripping his war axe, Grand Kata, tightly in his skeletal hand. In short, we have a resistance built up to the 10 aspects of death and all of the abilities they entail. Rashi replied with a feral grin, eyes changing color to a surreal, unnatural black, the pupils seemingly expanding and overtaking all other parts of his eyes. They do have an effect, but they cannot kill us easily. I'm tired of your lies. Baragon snarled before throwing his war axe right at Rashi, who easily sidestepped the bladed weapon before vanishing in a blur of motion. Why don't you prove it? He knew exactly where the old man would reappear, and spinning around grabbed onto his right wrist with his left hand, watching as his opponent's eyes widened before activating his senescentia to full power. He watched as the ruinous forces he controlled fell upon the red-haired man's hand, smirking as the skin, flesh, cartilage and muscle simply rotted away from his forearm all the way down to the tips of his fingers, becoming ash before vanishing in the wind. His opponent howled in pain, and Baragon reveled in every moment of it. He howled and howled and howled until his voice became hoarse, but then he stopped screaming and simply lowered his head. For a moment the second Espada thought he had simply lost consciousness from the pain, but when his free hand gripped onto the wrist of the hand holding onto him he suddenly felt that something was very wrong. When the red-haired man raised his head it was not the features of a pained and tortured man that greeted him, but the feral smirk of someone who had outsmarted his enemy. His now skeletal hand had suffered from the after effects of his ability to the point where even the bones were flaking away, but he did not seem to care. It was then that Baragon noticed that the decay had stopped at his elbow. There was no proof that the deterioration had progressed any further. He watched in surprise as the man before him did not attempt to get free, but instead allowed his captured limb to continue to feel the full brunt of his senescentia, to the point where the bone itself had turned to ash and vanished in the wind. Then his other hand slammed against his right cheek in a simple slap. A simple slap, yet it was enough to send him stumbling a few steps away, forcing him to relinquish his grasp on the man's right arm. Let me show you something from the old books, young blood. Baragon watched as his absent limb began to regenerate, beginning with the ashes of his very bones coming back together to recreate an exact replica of his bones from elbow to fingertips, every joint. Those bones and joints were soon covered by layers of cartilage and muscle, and the Espada watched in intrigue and horror as veins began repumping blood into the rebuilt tissue before it was completely covered by a layer of skin. By the time he was flexing his forearm and hand it seemed that the rotting of that limb had never happened. God King, you say? The man asked before his face morphed into a feral grin. Let's put that title of yours to the test. Are you strong enough to kill one of the 9 lords? Let's find out. His spiritual pressure intensified, stronger than even the female from before. His features morphed, canines becoming longer, broader and sharper. His ears became long and pointed, eyes once again morphing into a huge dark scara which lacked the whites associated with human eyes. His spiritual pressure became visible around him as a mass of maroon flames, scorching to all within a 50-meter radius. Howl at the moon! He growled before releasing a deep-throated hoot. Son Goku! He changed, completely and utterly. His form became taller and lankier, and his facial features, all exposed skin which was not covered by his armor, began to lose their wrinkles. The years fell from him as if they were leaves falling from a tree in autumn. His maroon hair lengthened to a cascade of maroon, a plate appeared on his forehead, with long legs and arms which were nothing but muscle. His clothes vanished, leaving his body covered in plate-like white armor from his neck all the way down to the tips of his toes and fingers. What was before him was no longer an aging old man. What was before him was a 20 to 30-year-old hybrid. He raised his head, took a deep breath of air and laughed heartily. I forgot how it felt to be in this form, everything becomes so clear. His whiteless eyes settled upon the deep blackness of Baragon's barren eye sockets before he released a feral grin, showing his enlarged, sharpened canines. Let's get started, my lord. I look forward to seeing if you really are a god king or not. He opened his mouth, spreading his arms as a cirrus formed on the tip of his tongue, a ball of swirling dark red energy. A release of breath fired the cirrus ball, turning into a beam of crimson energy capable of atomizing any lesser creature. The beam came within a meter of Lizenbairn before simply disintegrating into a mass of spirit particles. You have to do better than that. Baragon barked gruffly. Thought as much. Rashi muttered before vanishing in a blur of motion, reappearing several dozen meters above the skeletal hollow and pointing the middle and index fingers of both hands right at him, circular spheres of a dual cirrus forming on the tips of his fingers. He looked down to see the Shinigami captain, in the exact same place as before. Shinigami. It'll be a good idea to get off the roof. She looked up, and he saw that she was unnaturally pale and her face was covered in a sheen of sweat, yet she vanished in a Shuinpa barely a second later, reappearing several rooftops away before falling to her knees and clutching the stump where her missing limb once was. Rashi could be called many things, but to use this level of attack against an injured woman, even if she was a Shinigami, was a definite negative in his book. Some would call him a sexist pig, but he liked to think of himself as traditional. The two Sero exploded from his fingertips, lancing down towards the unmoving form of the second espada. The skeletal shape did not move, not an inch, remaining where it was, looking right up at him with those empty eye sockets. The resulting explosion destroyed the rooftop, and the full building below it, sending chunks of masonry and pulverized superstructure flying in all directions, impacting walls, smashing windows, crushing cars and breaking everything in the surrounding streets. When the smoke from the impact cleared, it showed nothing more than a small mountain of rubble. And Berrigan Lusenbairn was standing, completely unharmed, in the exact place where he was when the Fourth Lord unleashed his strike. Rashi looked down at him for a moment, before whistling in appreciation. "That is a fine ability you got there. So no matter how powerful the attack is, it won't break through that shell of yours. You seem to finally underdash." His words were stopped by a fist to the face, with such speed and precision that he didn't seem to know what hit him until he had been hit. The skeletal Aaronkar flew through the air at blurring speed, slamming into the adjacent apartment block and piercing straight through the concrete wall, across the floor, through the outer wall on the other side of the structure, across the other street, and finally through the wall of the next structure. Rashi frowned as he looked at his right arm, which had lost all of its flesh and cartilage up to midway through his forearm. A few moments passed before the cartilage and skin began to regenerate, and the Lord began flexing his fingers with an expression of controlled pain on his features. "So it goes through awaken hierro as well, does it? That is a pain." He heard her before she approached, not in her technique, or any flaw in her strike, for they were as silent and flawless as anything he had ever seen. His senses in his awakened form were just too acute that he could feel the presence of a fly from a mile away. He spun around and brought his other arm up in time to block a spinning heel kick, grabbing onto the ankle and slamming her to the ground. The Shinigami coughed up blood as the air was forced from her lungs before beginning a tremor of hacking and coughing. "Do you really think you could defeat me in your condition, woman?" She had a petite frame, with shoulder-length black hair done up in two braids tied with white cloth, pale skin and gray eyes which showed such fight in them. Such supreme stubbornness was commendable. What was more commendable was when she began forcing herself back to her feet, falling onto her side when she tried to use her left arm for support, which wasn't there anymore. Still she refused to lay down, and instead rocked herself so that she could use her right hand for support, slowly getting to her feet. The espada did a number on this one. "I applaud your strength and fortitude, Shinigami," Rashi said as she looked right at him with fierce dark orbs which did not seem to know defeat or surrender. "Most in your position would be barely able to move, let alone get back to your feet. I would recommend a medic or a doctor, though." She glared at him, obviously insulted that he didn't seem interested in fighting her or threatened by her. "You bastard, who the hell are you?" Rashi smiled. "Who are we? We're just a worried group of hollows who want their domain back, nothing more." Before she could muster a reply, the building across the street collapsed. There was a groan of steel, and then it just collapsed as if it were hundreds of years old. Masses of rubble, wood and steel fell away, becoming another huge mountain of rubble and debris. The Aaronkar rose from the collapsing structure, skeletal hand tapping the bone where his left cheek would normally be. "I wonder how many more times you can do that, trash," Berrigan called, raising his right hand and allowing his long-poled, double-headed battle axe to form. "He is going to be a problem," Rashi muttered as he flexed his recently healed fingers. "With that ability of his, it doesn't matter how powerful you are. If you hit him long range, any attack will disintegrate before it hits him. If you try short range, you will become nothing more than ash, the perfect defense and offense all in one." Sui Feng already knew all of this. The entire time these two hollows had been fighting, she had been attempting to come up with a new strategy to try and get through the espada's defenses. But every attempt she made on him failed, and those failed attempts had cost her in her left arm right up to the elbow, turned to ash by his rotting ability. She only narrowly escaped such an end by ordering her lieutenant to chop it off. Laughter made her look over at the new hollow, who threw his head back and howled in glee before leveling a bloodthirsty grin in the direction of the espada. "Gaara is going to be pissed when he gets here. His ultimate defense seems to have been surpassed." A clawed hand grabbed onto her shoulder with lightning speed, and before Sui Feng could react, she found herself flying through the air and impacting against the far side of the roof, right into the concrete railing. She immediately berated herself for letting her guard down around a hollow before looking up. Her eyes widened. Berrigan had moved with such speed that he must have become a blur, skeletal hand grasping around the new arrival's throat and squeezing. She looked on in shock as the skin of his neck began to rot and decay. "I will rip your head off," the espada snarled. The fist slammed into the skeletal nose with enough force to break the bone and send the hollow flying back several meters, releasing the other hollow from his gaze. Once freed, Rashi doubled over, hacking and coughing, hands grasping onto the decayed flesh of his neck even as it repaired itself with impressive speed. He looked up with bloodshot eyes before glancing down at his fist and managing a growl as he noticed the skin and cartilage of his knuckles were nothing more than bone. "That was a cheap trick, young pup." "An eye for an eye," Berrigan replied as he straightened. "Good point," Rashi replied after a moment of thought, cracking his neck muscles right and left. "I love fighting supposedly invincible opponents. It makes beating you all the more satisfying." It took Suifeng a moment to process what had happened, but the more she thought of it, the more it made sense. Did he throw her away not as an attack but to get her out of range? Did he just protect her? The thought seemed impossible to her, a hollow protecting a Shinigami, yet did it just happen? The idea pissed her off. There was a sudden surge of spiritual pressure, catching the attention of all three combatants. It was Rashi who seemed to be taken by it the most. His head snapped to the side, in the direction of the battle between Captain Hitsugaya and the two female hollows. His eyes widened and his face went pale. Yujito! They moved so fast that they were a complete blur. The single sword of the Espada known as Kaot Stark, and the dual katana belonging to the captain of the 8th Division, Shunsui Kairaka, were nothing but near unidentifiable blurs of liquid silver as they struck and countered each other with near continuous, almost ringing clangs of steel. Like their swords, their wielders were difficult to keep track of. Through a succession of Kido spells and hollow abilities, they proved to all who watched them that they were some of the most powerful competitors on the field. Neither had released their swords, either had showed any large piece of their abilities to each other. But at this moment in this round they were almost completely evenly matched. Lightning, fire and dark red spiritual energy struck, breaking through superstructure and singeing the air with absolute ease. Fu simply watched the visage before her, knowing that it was exactly that, a visage. The two opponents were testing each other, trying to find any potential advantages or disadvantages which could be used in their favor. Neither of them were using even a third of their strength in this battle, at least not yet. "Okay, so why aren't you doing anything?" She looked over to see the other young Arankar giving the white-haired Shinigami a baleful look, to which the man just shrugged his shoulders and offered a serene smile. He was sitting cross-legged on the roof of an adjacent building, watching the battle with a casual aloofness. "There's no need to interfere. My friend over there usually likes to fight his battles fairly. The question you should be asking is why this lady here isn't jumping in." Fu looked over at him from her own sitting position, lying on the roof a few meters away from him. She looked over, studying him for a moment before sitting up in a fluid motion, crossing her legs and folding her arms as she looked up at the two men fighting in the skies above. "They're not taking it seriously," she said after a moment of silence. "Huh?" the little Arankar asked in indignation. "Why would you say that?" the white-haired Shinigami asked serenely, though she could tell that he was interested, if only subtly. Fu sighed as she laid down again, propping her head up by putting her hands behind her head and closing her eyes. "They're not even using a quarter of their power. When they decide to fight all out, then I will join in." "Boring," the Arankar girl murmured with a pout before looking over at the Shinigami and cracking a childish smile. "I suppose I'll fight you then." Fu cracked open an eye in time to see her reach for the horn on the right-hand side of her head and pulling on it, revealing that it was actually the hilt of a sword, a curved sword. She then looked over at the Shinigami, who was still sitting cross-legged, relaxed and serene. He even had a cup of sake in his hand. "Can I have a cup?" she asked. He looked over at her, surprised, before smiling softly. "When you're older." "I'm almost 3 times older than you," she retorted as she flipped to her feet and walked over to him at a sedate pace. The Shinigami looked at her for a long moment, before shrugging and reaching into the long sleeve of his shahakusho, pulling out a small bottle of sake and another cup. He popped the cork with his thumb, poured a small quantity into both cups and handed the new one to her, which she took. "Is it poisoned?" she asked. The Shinigami downed his in response. "Does that answer your question?" "Thank you," she replied, downing her own cup before sitting beside him and allowing it to be refilled. "It does. Why the act?" "Pardon?" "You were acting pretty childish beforehand," the Reaper replied as he refilled his own cup. "Now you're acting as mature as can be." "I'm bipolar." "No, you're not." "Worth a try," she replied, downing her second before looking at the empty cup. "This stuff is good." "Another?" "Please." She allowed her cup to be refilled again. "My big brother would love this stuff. I'm guessing he's the one sitting on the throne over there?" "Good eye." "Thank you." "Don't ignore me," The Arrancar cried in agitation before forming a siro on the tip of her tongue and firing it right at them. The Shinigami took a sip of his sake with one hand, and with the other casually swiped the siro aside, allowing it to fly far to the right and dissipate into the atmosphere. What the hell? That was pretty weak, Fu muttered as the Shinigami refilled her cup for a fourth time. Indeed, the white-haired man agreed. I have been a captain for a long time and I have never seen such an underpowered siro. Perhaps you should return home and play with a ball or something. You assholes! She roared as she jumped forward with her sword held at the ready. Stop underestimating me! It happened in a flash. The Shinigami stood, half drawing his Zanpakuto in time to block the young Arrancar's sword. Then he blurred into motion, kicking her away and sending her flying several meters through the air before she could stop herself. By the time she could, he was standing, holding onto her sword as if it were a walking stick. Wow! Fu whistled before breaking out into a grin. That's a pretty cool pose. Thank you. You're welcome, she replied as she stood up and offered him her hand. My name's Fu. Jushiro, he replied, shaking her hand. Stop ignoring me! Go home, kid, Fu called back. What? She's right, Jushiro replied as he broke eye contact with Fu and met Lilinet with an unwavering gaze, one of a veteran soldier. In strength terms, I have seen Jillian-class Minos Grande release stronger Siro than what you just released. You are not strong enough for this battle. Well said, the seventh replied before tossing him the cup, which he deftly caught. I enjoyed drinking with you, but I am afraid I cannot continue. I am here for a purpose. Jushiro nodded as he finished his own cup of sake before casually placing the two back inside his sleeve, drawing his Zanpakuto in a swift motion. I guessed as much. I am your opponent. I'm sorry to hear that, Fu replied as she held out her hand, allowing a long-poled halberd to form into existence. It was a beautiful weapon, with a crescent moon-shaped blade and a black tassel fixed at the tip, fluttering in the wind. She spun it expertly in her hand before falling into a battle position, ready for him. Shall we? The Shinigami was already moving, using a shunpa to gain the advantage of higher ground, right above her head and came down with a diagonal cut. The hollow was fast though, spinning around and bringing up her halberd in time to block the strike. The captain disengaged, somersaulted back and pointed an open-palmed hand right at the lithe woman. Heido 31, Shikaho. A ball of right energy swirled into existence and fired right at her. Fu watched it, forming a bala at the tip of her tongue before firing it at the last second. The two balls met, and exploded in a swirling mass of dark and bright reds. Beautiful, she muttered at the mass of color, before spinning around in time to see the Shinigami prepare to release another Kido spell directly at her. She felt so nostalgic, seeing one of the Shinigami's spiritual arts being used after so long. She opened her mouth, preparing another bala just as he called the name of his spell and set it loose. Heido 33, Sokatsui! He released a torrent of blur spiritual energy right at her at a wide arc, forcing her to disengage her bala and jump high into the air, watching with a grin as the electric blue energy moved up to meet her. A siro appeared from her free hand and she fired it at a wide arc, allowing it to destabilize and become not a beam but a wide wave of energy similar to his spell. The two strikes met, and exploded in a dazzling display of blue and red. She used the flash to vanish in a sonito, reappearing right behind the captain, and with a wide swing of her halberd released a torrent of purple spiritual pressure, a spearhead-shaped blast aimed at piercing his chest. The Shinigami vanished courtesy of a shunpa, missing her strike altogether before reappearing directly behind her, and forced to bring up his Zanpakuto in time to deflect a stab from her halberd, forcing the blade to the side and away from him. Good use of Kido, she said with a smile. Not bad reactions either. I was one of the best in my class. The captain replied with a serene smile before vanishing from sight, and Fu heard his voice directly above her, once again creating a Kido spell, this one in the upper numbers. Heido 63, Raikoho! He was right above her, firing a huge blast of lightning-shaped energy right at her, taking on the form of a powerful lightning bolt. She looked up at him, eyes wide, before attempting to blur away from the attack. She was a split second late, managing to dodge the worst of it, but still gaining a nasty-looking burn on her left arm as she came to a stop several meters away. She smelt her burning flesh before she felt it, and it was only after looking at the blackened skin of her left arm that she took a sharp exhale of breath. Damn, that hurt. Sorry. She gave him a puzzled look, knowing that the burn was already beginning to heal. Sorry for what? It was a good hit. You heal fast, he replied. One of our advantages, we can take almost extreme amounts of punishment as long as it isn't fatal or crippling. she replied, spinning her halberd in her hand a few times before once again falling into a defensive posture. I suppose it's my turn, right? A siro began appearing from the palm of her free hand, swirling and increasing in size until it was twice the normal mass. Joshua waited, preparing himself to move to dodge it, considering the second it took a hollow, even in Arankar, to make such a powerful strike. It was usually easy to see which direction it was coming from and how to defend against it. She vanished in a blur, and the captain's eyes widened before he looked up in time to see her right above him, firing a powerful siro. Dark crimson light obscured his vision. The siro collided with him in an explosive mass of crimson energy, but the hollow didn't whoop in triumph, nor did she act as if the battle was over. She remained where she was, waiting patiently. The smoke cleared. The Shinigami remained standing, a shield-shaped circle of golden light between him and her. The solid, condensed spiritual energy was chipped and charred, but it was strong enough to take her siro and not disintegrate on impact. Bakudo 39, and Kozen! Very good reflexes, Fu said, more to herself than him. Joshua was about to respond before he felt something, a weakening in spiritual pressure from the battle taking place with Captain Hitsugaya. His opponent noticed faster though, a lot faster. Her head suddenly snapped to the side with supreme quickness, eyes widening before becoming narrowed slits. Naruto is going to be mad, she muttered, but her eyes were now shimmering with the promise of violence, and her grip tightened on her halberd. He dares strike at another one of my sisters! Joshua felt it, a sudden burst of spiritual energy. He looked back to where the throne which housed the strongest hollow in attendance, only to see that it was now empty. The captain didn't have to guess, because he already knew what the leader's likely destination was. From the moment the female hollow released, he knew that she was capable of beating the young Captain Hitsugaya, and Yamamoto may be a bit too rule-conscious, but when it came down to the coin he protected his subordinates. Sorry. He looked around and was just barely able to bring his own Zanpakuto to deflect as she flashed in with a stab. But I need to finish this one quickly and rip that bastard limb from limb. He knew who she meant, and his eyes narrowed. I can't let you do that. She swung her halberd, and the force behind it surprised the white-haired captain, who was thrown backward by several meters before coming to a halt. He was just able to sense her presence before she came at him again, this time from behind. He spun around, once again deflecting a stab from her halberd before attempting to move forward for a diagonal slash. She didn't vanish this time. She blurred, and she was right beside him. He was just able to bring up his Zanpakuto to deflect the new strike, but it was so powerful it sent him soaring through the air by a dozen meters before forcing himself to a stop. He looked up from his crouch to see her coming right at him, halberd ready for a swing. He was about to bring up his sword to block when it hit him. A tremor, which made his whole body go numb, and suddenly he went into a fit of hacking and coughing, blood suddenly dribbling from his mouth. His eyes widened in shock before he cursed his illness for his weak body. Not now, of all the time for it to hit, it had to be now. There was a sudden shrill gust of wind, and he looked up to see Fu right in front of him. Her halberd was mere millimeters away from the side of his head, yet it went no further. Her eyes were widened in surprise before narrowing in confusion, brow furrowing. You're hurt, she murmured in disbelief. She looked at him closer, and he could swear her eyes were glowing before they widened. No, you're sick. Yukitake was about to say something, but her sudden end of hostility was surprising. The halberd vanished from her hands, and she straightened herself, amber eyes looking into his for a few moments before she sighed. I withdraw, she said. I will not fight an opponent with such a disadvantage. No. She looked at him with a frown as he straightened. I can still fight. Her amber eyes once again looked into his for a few moments before looking to the side. No, I still withdraw. Yukitake was unsure whether he should be insulted by this or not. She had an opportunity to end this battle, to finish him off and go after the captain commander. Why didn't she take it? Why did she halt her blade? I will not attack an opponent who cannot defend himself, she said suddenly, as if she were able to read his mind. She looked him in the eye again. But dash. As well as that, she added, cutting him off. I've grown fond of you. It took him a moment to properly analyze her words, but by then he was bewildered beyond belief. What? You shared sake with me, 4 of them in fact, she replied, giving him a smile. You're not like Shinigami I've met before. In fact, I'd say you're a bit of an oddball. He waited for a moment, digesting the information before throwing her an unsure smile. I'm not sure whether to accept that as a compliment or not. She giggled in response. Take it any way you want, but I'll still need you to stand aside. I will not. She sighed as she shouldered her halberd. Please, I'm begging you. The Shinigami fighting that Arankar is my friend, and I will not let you double-team him." "You misunderstand," she replied. "I'm not looking to double up on anyone." "What?" "He and his fellows have been squatting in my big brother's domain. We're more interested in sending a message to both sides than teaming up against one," she declared, spinning her halberd in her hands idly. Her amber eyes looked at the battle between Shunsui and the Espada, and Yucatec followed her vision to see that the two were now separated, and that the younger Arankar was now by his side. "What is going on?" he muttered. Fu shushed him before smiling. "Wait and see. It's about to get interesting now." Yujuto stood where she was, unable to move, unable to even breathe as she watched the display in front of her. The blonde didn't sense him coming right at her at all, barely realizing he was there until the very last second. She wasn't given enough time to turn and face him before his blade pierced through her steel skin like a knife through warm butter. Blood dripped from the serrated edge of his blade. It wasn't hers, though. The blade bit a few millimeters into the skin of her wrist before it was forced to a stop. Naruto stood between them, feet spread and right hand gripping tightly onto Yamamoto's zanpakuto. His hand was bleeding profusely, crimson rivulets tracing the edge of the Captain Commander's blade before allowing gravity to force them to fall to the ground far below. Just the sight of Naruto, her Naruto, bleeding was a shock to her. The eldest of the Hollow, whose hero was so strong that nothing bar the most powerful of attacks at point-blank range could pierce it. She remembered Yamamoto when he was a vice-captain, tall and lean, with full brown hair and a few days-old stubble. He looked nothing like he looked now, an old man covered in battle scars with white hair. He was nowhere near this powerful the last time she saw him either. Yet the evidence was there, right in front of her, his attack which could have crippled or killed her with her barely realizing it. She needed Naruto to save her. His left hand circled around her waist and pulled her to him, so close that her body was pressed flush against his. She didn't mind. He was only this intimate with her. He leaned in to whisper into her ear, eyes still locked with the Captain Commander. "You're playing around," he said with all seriousness. "Stop it." "I wasn't playing," she pouted, but seeing the seriousness in his eyes she sighed and relented, pressing her head to his chest. "You were playing," Naruto replied before planting a chaste kiss onto her forehead. "All right, yes I was," she relented after a moment. "Stop doing it," he added, pressing his head to her temple. She relished the warmth of the contact, and purred quietly without meaning to. "Stop messing around and go wild." She closed her eyes and smiled. "All right." "Good." Naruto nodded, before releasing her from his grasp and moving so that the two of them were back to back, him facing Yamamoto and her facing the Espada and the young captain. She was a full head smaller than him, and considerably slimmer. "Now hurry along, and let me deal with the old fart." "He's strong," she muttered, giving his left arm a squeeze. "Not as strong as you, but damn well close." Naruto shrugged. "That's what happens. We remained the same over the years while the world got stronger." Yujuto said nothing in reply, just smiled before taking off at breakneck speed, aiming right at the young Shinigami and the Espada. Naruto didn't watch her go. His eyes were completely on Yamamoto. He took a few steps forward, watching as the old man before him didn't relent, or step back or show even the slightest hint of trepidation and fear, but remained where he was. It was an unmovable object, meeting an unstoppable force. "You haven't changed," Yamamoto said solemnly as he raised his zanpakuto. "Haven't aged a single day." Naruto smirked, bringing his own sheathed sword into being with a thought, and catching it before gravity forced it from his reach. He drew the blade slowly, hearing the continuous grind of steel against wood. "You've aged pretty badly." Yamamoto chuckled, something which would horrify any of the present officers under his command. "It has been 3,000 years. "That it has," Naruto agreed as he finished drawing his blade, holding the scabbard in front of him and rearing his sword back, smirk morphing into a feral grin. "So tell me, old man, do you want to live forever?" Yamamoto looked right at him before taking a breath and bringing his sword up in a ready stance. "At my age, forever seems far too long, and it looks like what I did will finally catch up to me today. I am prepared." "It is not me who will do so," Naruto replied with a smile, waiting. "Someone else has that right." A gargantua opened right behind him, easily big enough to swallow him whole if it were a real mouth. The darkness within just showed the shape of a feminine silhouette, tall and slim with long hair. The figure stepped into the light without hesitation and walked until she was standing right beside the Ninth Lord, hole between worlds snapping shut behind her. She was smaller in stature than the Ninth, top of her head only reaching up to his chest. Her skin was as pale as he remembered, hair as black as midnight cascading down her shoulders all the way to the small of her back, gray orbs which once held such life but now were dulled, a sculpted round face with a dainty nose, long neck, and sinewy build. She wore a black armored vest which left her arms bare, leather pants and knee-high black boots. She hadn't changed. Even her style of dress was the same. He looked into her gray orbs for a moment, feeling disrespectful to shy away from her intense gaze. He knew this day was coming, ever since all those millennia ago when he knelt beside her and stayed with her until the end, until she was sealed away. She could not speak, could not move, but the look in her eyes haunted him to this day and perhaps for the rest of his life. Betrayal seemed to be sculpted into those gray orbs. "Rin," he muttered. "He's all yours, pup, just like I promised." Her words weren't a reply or a retort, but a message that she was not in a talking mood, not by a long shot. "Bare your fangs, Coco!"